Okay, so we'll let him work on the video and we'll go around the table. So I'm Scott Jones, I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Operations. John?
John Palmer, I'm Financial Ops here at USB.
D. Miles, Dane School District.
Duke Mossman, Director at NUES.
Vaughn Horton, Financial Operations, USVE.
Brett Balthazar, Financial Ops.
Ben Lishman with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst.
Jacob Wright, Governor's Office of Management and Budget.
Kerry Reese, Kane School District.
Chad Lloyd, Sevier School District.
Bruce Williams, Garfield School District.
Dale Lamborn Rich School District.
Mark Huntsman, Board of Education.
So Chair Huntsman, will turn it over to you to start off, and then after your thing, you can kick it over to me, and we'll go through the. Chad had sent some rule proposals. We'll review those real quick for the benefit of the group. Then we'll go into some additional suggestions or questions that USB staff have worked to put together and then we'll determine where we're at the end of the meeting to see about subsequent meetings in order to get ready and prepared for the legislative session. Okay, Chair?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for serving here. I guess it's a committee that you're calling yourself. Is there a name? NESS. Our NESS committee, and I understand the objective here, and appreciate your work and your service. I wanted to come today to thank you, and then also observe a little bit. I've got to leave probably about 2:30, 2:40, but I do have a couple concerns, and one of my biggest concerns is before the legislative session starts that we have some kind of plan in place, and I'm very grateful the legislature is saying, hey, work this out and come back with something instead of them wanting to fix it themselves. So Ben, thanks for that. I don't know if you played a role in that or you just got assigned to it. Also, I'm also hoping that in January, our January board meeting, we'll have our committee meeting in finance, that Scott's to give a report to us, and we kind of need to know what we need to be doing on our end as a state board, whether we have input or not and where. And so that's right around the corner, isn't it, Scott?
Yes, January 10th, I think.
Coming up, so if we need to be taking action, we'll start that in committee. If there's some action that we can take or support whatever this committee's putting through. And I just want to just say a couple things to this, to NESS and the funding. It's important, it's relevant. However, the formula, the way the formula is put together isn't working for our board, and apparently it's not working for the legislature too. So we're hoping for some good betterments coming forward. We also recognize the hardest part of this is there's going to be, every time you tweak a formula or massage a formula or redo a formula, there's going to be winners and losers, and that's the hardest part of this. And we recognize the weight of that moving forward, but it also can be said that without a change, there's already winners and losers, because some are probably might be getting something that they shouldn't, and it might best serve to be someplace else. So there's two sides of that coin as you're moving it back and forth. But I'm hoping everyone can just say, okay, we've got to come up with a solution and a fix, and this is what it should look like, and we start down that path. And if we're wrong, and if it's not meeting its objectives, then we need to change it. So I recognize that burden that you guys are carrying by being on this committee, recognizing there could be, there will be, there's no question, there will be winners and losers as somebody looks from the outside at this. And so Thanks again for your service, and we're looking forward to some really good recommendations pretty soon, and we don't know what they are yet. Hopefully we get there pretty soon. Did I cover everything, Scott?
Yeah.
This is not my meeting. This is your meeting, and I appreciate being a guest in here. So I'll be really quiet until I have to leave. Thank
Okay.
you.
So Jamie, pull the rule out. So Chad, if we can just go through this with the group, do you mind
No, yeah, that's,
kind of, talking about what makes sense to us? And we've looked at it. We appreciate the time. So you have some questions, and then we'll go into some other pieces of it. Does that help, Chad? If you start there, or where do you want to start?
yeah, and those are the changes. So, I mean, we met as a group, and really Bruce did most of the work on this, and then as a group, we just wordsmithed it a little bit. But
Let me kind of give you an idea of where we started, just kind of, the first is, wherever possible, we thought if we could make a change to board rule, rather than having to have legislative changes, that it would be easier and more rapidly fixed, okay? That's the first thing we looked at. And if you scroll up farther, even to look at the title change, right now the board rule deals strictly with classifying small schools. It really has nothing to do with how the funding is distributed in the rule itself. All of that is still in statute, where it talks about the regression formula. And so I was kind of surprised as I read through it that there wasn't anything that really talked about funding. It was just talking about classifying the small schools. And so the recommendation that we're making is to rename it to be necessarily existent small schools, so it would be broader than just classifying them, that it could also contain some information concerning how the funding happens. So that's the first thing we did.
Okay, I jump in right there. Sure. So this is the point where I think for the good of the group and to move things forward, and I know this is just a little salient point here, but does anybody have any issue? Because there's been some side discussions about, well, maybe it's time to look at the potential that it just becomes a rural funding model, or am I wrong about that? Or can we still maintain this and go that it is, along with Bruce's recommendation, that we're still going down this road, that, we want to make sure that the title change is okay and that we're calling it what it is? Does anybody have any questions or concerns about that? Jacob?
So I don't have any concerns, but Bruce asked me this before the meeting started, and so I'll just maybe touch on it real quickly.
Sure.
Since you just sort of mentioned it. That the governor recommended $3 million for rural schools in particular. Now, in the recommendation, that doesn't replace NESS. It's in addition to NESS, but the governor is interested in looking at the broader issue of rural school funding, addressing potential inequities there. So this is, and recognizes that this is a small amount of money, but it's a foot in the door, if you will, to start going that direction. And the specific details around how that money would be distributed haven't been determined. The governor will work with the legislature to sort that out, and with you, with stakeholders presumably, through the session. In sort of informal discussions, we've talked about looking at counties of the 3rd through 6th classes, or rather students in those counties, as being rural students. Long term, and this isn't strictly part of the governor's recommendation either, but there have been discussions about focusing the funding more broadly on rural schools, and NESS would continue to be a subgroup within that. But at this point, I don't know of any intentions that would pose a threat to this.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, the next thing we were really looking at, and this is the things we talked about to some degree in past meetings is the actual amount of the funding is a political decision that will be made by the legislature, and that as that we were looking at this board rule, the concern was not so much about the amount of money. That's a political decision that we all can work with. With the legislature, it's how the monies are distributed, and we knew that there was concerns about a couple of things. State Board of Education and Ben talked about two things. One is that in the past, we've had a situation where with the full appropriation based on the regression formulas was unable to be fully distributed. And so as a result, there is in state board rule the concept that the following year any carryover monies would be distributed based on tax effort. Okay, and that's happened and whatever. So all the money has been distributed. The concern was we're not distributing it all the first year and under the formula. So that's why we started out by saying, as per Utah Code 53 F2 3046, the distribution of funding under the program will be determined from an allocation table based on a regression formula. That's basically a quote out of statute, just trying to restate that. And then we went on to say that the factors within the regression formula, the allocation table would be adjusted annually to fully distribute the legislative amount. We talked about in past meetings how that could happen. We may not have come to the right solution as to how that regression formula would be adjusted annually, but our goal would be whatever is politically appropriated from the legislature each year would be fully allocated, and we wouldn't have to anymore rely on that. Generally, there still may be some instances that mid-year that things happen so that Jamie would be unable to distribute all the money, but it wouldn't be $1 million. It would be a small rounding error probably issue as opposed to the monies that we've been having. And so we adjust that to fully distribute the legislative appropriation for the program. This adjustment would be completed in a manner that would maintain the proportionality of each formula's respective share of the total allocation of funds. And then the issue that was brought up earlier as well about schools that are really an elementary and they're in the same school. Say you have a K-12 school right now, the statute and those sorts of things don't look at that. And so we were talking about we would treat them as though they were an elementary and a secondary and allocate funds that way. The next was talking about the process. And we had a discussion, and I know that Natalie talked about different ways that we may identify schools and call them NESS. We looked at it from a different perspective, and the proposal was that the reality is NESS schools, once they're NESS schools, unless they grow out of it, they never will go away. And so we spend, in our opinion, an inordinate amount of time every couple of years having to go through an application process. And so basically we're saying schools NESS classified on July 1, 2018 as NESS schools wouldn't need to apply again except under 2B, which is if they're existent and there's changes to the grade or building configurations, location of the school exceeds the maximum medium size. In other words, they grow out of it, that they would then no longer be a NESS school, but otherwise they'd be there. And then we also went into the issue of applying to add a school. There may be schools in the future that are added. And so we wanted to deal with that. So when applying to add a school, an application would then be required to go to the State Board of Education and be approved. And then one of the things we felt like that was important to do is to identify the fact that NESS schools and charter schools are different. Generally, charter schools are in larger metropolitan areas. There are a few that are rural, but we were suggesting that NESS schools are not something that we have a choice on, where a charter school is, and so we identified the charter schools are not eligible to be designated as necessarily existent. So we were just trying to come up with, and all the other changes are just renumbering so that it'd be consistent. But the goal was just to try and say, okay, if there's a way to work within current state board rule to accomplish the goals and deal with the major issues that were identified during our discussions, which mainly were getting all the money allocated the first year that the legislature appropriates, and dealing with schools that don't fit into the categories that are in statute, that we wanted to deal with them, and that's what we tried to deal with in this proposal. Try and do it as clearly as possible, do it at the lowest level possible at the state board rather than having to take it to the legislature, and hopefully identify the issues. So that's why we put together the proposal we did.
I think there's one other key point that we didn't write into this. I think I may have mentioned it in my email when I submitted it. And I think it goes to Ben's other concern that he's brought up. I mean, he's talked about the money not being fully distributed, which we feel like we've addressed, as Bruce just articulated. And then B is the money getting to the schools. So we as a group felt like, we don't know, the board rule probably already is written well enough. We just need a NESS program, and let's account for the funds in the NESS program so that it rolls up on the APR, and then it's easy to see where the money's going and if it's going to the school.
Vaughn, one of the reasons we didn't propose to change the board rule, as Vaughn mentioned earlier, if you scroll to the bottom, that already talks about the fact that we're required to send the monies to those schools, but we've never been required to account for that. Yeah, and I don't think that any of the districts that have NESS funding have a problem with that. I think we just need to set something up with Vaughn and to have a program, and we can report that money, how it's allocated and spent very easily. It's not a huge effort on our part. It's just setting it up that way.
Okay. So let's pause here for a second. And so you've heard, so since the last meeting, we asked for this. It's come back to us. Bruce has ran through it. Chad's brought some salient points up too. So I'm going to go around the room, and you guys tell me what are your concerns still, or what do you see not still. Ultimately, the goal is that it's a unified presentation to the legislature that we have solved a problem, that we've done our due diligence, so to speak, and gone through this together. Do it. Maybe the board rule isn't enough. Maybe it is enough, so let's go around the table. I'm going to skip Jamie because Jamie has some other questions that she has and things that I think will help flesh this out, especially as we go around the table, because it's important for her to listen because she's got another document that probably will address some of the things as we go around the table. John?
Well, I'm good.
D? Anything with the rule? Anything you want to add? Any concerns? You think it's...
The next little paragraph down. See, actually it's 2 or number 4. Go ahead just a little bit right there. There, in addition to the requirements, one-way bus travel, or board-approved bus routes for any student in the same district to the nearest school within the district of the same shall require. Just wondering here if we were to add something about another school that had capacity. We have, we do all the, when you're trying to, well, maybe the first rule is already taking care of this, but when you're trying to go through and analyze, we'll do small schools, what's the distance to the next school where you could ship these kids? It doesn't really talk about capacity. All my schools are full.
That's under 5A, isn't it? School and district has been consolidated to the maximum extent possible.
Kind of the same thing, yeah.
That's
It's 2 different criteria. The transportation criteria is the second, and then the third is if you don't meet the transportation, then there's other exceptions that the superintendent can approve.
Is that where you're going?
Just the thought that all my schools are full, so the exercise of saying, could this school be consolidated somewhere else based on distance or whatever else? I mean, they're all full, so there's no way to consolidate. Should that be a consideration? Are your schools full, or is there capacity to move them somewhere? just a thought that, something to maybe make it a little bit easier to say, schools are full, so
Here's what I was,
we're at.
I thought, Dee, and that was, when you look at what we added, it's talking about all the existing schools. And now, if you do that, then this becomes the criteria to add a school. At least that's how I looked at it. That's all it was, is if you're adding a new school, it would take those criteria into account. The others would stay that way unless you grow out.
That's true. So at that point, just forget what I said. And
No, you're fine.
No, it's
That was
discussion.
good. Yeah, I wanted to make sure.
Good discussion.
Anything else, Dee? Just pertinent to the rule or what?
I think that looks pretty
Okay,
good.
Duke?
No.
Vaughn?
We could add a program very easily and we can put it into the APR. That's not a problem.
Okay. Brad?
Nope, I'm good.
Ben? What are you thinking?
First, we haven't really talked about this, but I don't know that statute is strong enough
Okay.
on the qualifications of a student. And that's not necessarily a huge issue, just that I don't know that that's something from a policy perspective that should be given to the board. I'm still thinking through that. As far as qualification, and you had mentioned that section there, lifting that and putting it in statute at least provides some more stability. But I would argue that it doesn't matter if it's within the district, but if there's a out-of-district school that's closer, that be considered.
That is part of the board rule as well, that out of district be considered.
Wait, hold on a second. Say that again, Dee. It is part of the
Yeah,
rule?
it's in the
Yeah,
It's
okay.
down there somewhere saying that should be looked at.
Okay. You go okay, Ben?
So that's kind of aside from this conversation here, but you brought up that section, so I wanted to highlight that.
Okay.
I agree that this fixes the issue of allocating the money. It doesn't fix the underlying issue with the formulas. And so I'm a little reticent in the fact that it may give the perception that everything is okay.
Okay.
Other than that,
Okay. And so everybody hold that thought, because I think we're gonna progress into some other additional suggestions or recommendations to the group that might help alleviate that concern. Jacob? Are you okay, Ben? Are you good? Or anything else?
other than I do like the APR.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay, Jacob?
I agree with Ben.
Okay. Carrie?
Don't have any more at this point.
Chad?
Not right now.
I said my piece.
Okay. Superintendent Rogers, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm here with my BA as well, Lark Reynolds. Lark, do you have anything on this discussion? It's a little bit hard to follow, but we don't have any comments at this point in time.
Okay, Superintendent Ray?
Yes, I appreciate the work of the subcommittee. I think their plan resolves the issues that we were presented in our first meeting, the needs of this group and what we needed to accomplish. I just would like to address the perception that there will be winners and losers. My perception is that if we fix the problems and we have a solution, everyone will get more funding and there will be no losers. The only losers in the proposal would be those who got slightly more in the second distribution, but it was such a small percentage, and the difference of distribution would be so insignificant that any increase in funding would make everyone a winner, and there would be no losers. So I just think we need to be careful how we sell this to the districts to get support. I think the proposal solves the problems. I don't think it creates any losers. So I think that's an important thing to remember.
Okay. They're the only two on the line, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay. So Jamie, go ahead.
Do you want me to go through all of them?
Well, so anything on the rule first, and then we'll segue into this point.
Okay, so 1A, factors adjusted annually. I'm not comfortable with just manipulating, the word I'll use, factors within the table, not based on any data that can be reperformed for an auditor or justified in any manner. with the splitting of grades still, I still feel that we need ADM bands that are, because those are in statute right now, that conform with the bands of current NESS schools.
Okay. Anything else with the rule?
I have other things, but I didn't know if you wanted me to stick
You have
with.
one there though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we have the rule, we have James, now we're gonna go to another paper that we prepared for this meeting, so if you can pull that up electronically too, because we didn't have copies of this.
No, but I can see if I can get you to.
Because you have to pull it up anyway so they can see it.
Playing with the formulas, I can see Jamie's concern.
I was because those issues before we,
Well, I think
unless they help.
they are in here.
They're in here.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to do. So good catch, Superintendent, good point. So what we did is we took your, we valued the input, the work, and so now we're trying to come back to you and say, okay, great, but here's still some concerns, right? Here's some, and so now we're going to this to allay those to you, to bring
I just
them
thought
to
put them all on the table.
Right, just all of them out on the table, so we'll get to it. I'm confident about that.
First one was application frequency. I think it's unclear in statute and board rule if every school needs to apply every year or if just new schools need to apply each year. So that's my first question, is we just need to clarify application frequency because I don't think it's clear in either statute or board rule.
Okay, thoughts on this?
How about that, some of that language that Bruce was talking about in the board rule, would that cover?
Yeah, that's
You'll
further.
do two? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. I'll get to that.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Okay, next one, we've already mentioned it, the ADM bans that are set forth in statute and regurgitated in rule. These don't have, so for eligibility, we talk about you have to meet the ADM bans. The second eligibility criteria is the one-way bus travel, which is what Dee was talking about. In reviewing applications and trying to figure out what everybody is sending into us, I see it's very difficult from an LEA's perspective to meet this criteria or to demonstrate this criteria. And I don't know if you guys want to voice comment on that.
One of the concerns that I've seen that's hard is it doesn't clarify whether that includes stops.
Correct. That's what I mentioned on here.
Because that could be a major, especially in a rural area, there may be multiple stops along the way, which would increase the time, because if all you're doing, which is what we've done in the past, is do a Google Maps and it tells you how long it's going to take. It's not really.
But that's not really a bus traveling, that's a car traveling. It doesn't include stops.
Yeah, that's right.
There's lots of nuances trying to figure out those two. So our request is either we need to clarify how to measure this or we just need to eliminate it as an eligibility criteria. With the ADM limitations, we either need to, for eligibility, use population density, use county classes. We talked about using something between 2 and 6 county classes, using that as an eligibility criteria with the ADM, and that's it to determine eligibility. Because with ADM, as schools grow, you're automatically going to come off of eligibility, and it's doing county classes is really easy to measure. Something that we at the state can figure out who's eligible each year without involving an LEA applying each year.
So we talked we talked quite a bit about the county class idea when we met, and I think I hinted at that in my email. I know Todd is. I called and talked about that a little bit too. One, we kind of looked at it as almost like the next leg of the stool. Like I think we all, as a group of BAs, like the idea of the mileage, but then the county class would be like another leg of eligibility. One concern with going to a county class type scenario is would we chew up the pie? If all of a sudden we just say it's county based, there's going to be schools that might be eligible that were never NESS schools prior to that. right?
We'd have to look and see.
There would be.
Have you had a chance to compare that county class to what it is now? Or?
Not yet.
Yeah,
These
because
are
doesn't that just turn it into all schools?
Well, that's the question. Is it, do we need small schools funding, isolated funding, rural funding?
Yeah, I think
That's why we,
combination of pots.
when we were looking at it, we looked at if you had the mileage criteria along with the rural criteria, that rural criteria could eliminate a lot of the subjective stuff, but you would keep your NESS schools in place through the mileage criteria.
So,
you would eat at the pie.
So Chad, how would you demonstrate mileage? Because we've had lots of people have lots of various things sent to us. Nothing is consistent.
I think we have like the time and miles on our like A1 reports, how long a route takes.
So the
like I know how
But
long a
you're
route.
including stopping for a couple minutes at each stop, right? Because that's included in your A1
Yeah.
reports, not
So
just,
I think that
not
would be
just
important
driving
that
time.
it's the bus, how long you're setting on the bus, not it's not a car. I mean,
which would capture the stop time.
Yeah.
You have to look at that.
I think you've got that third category, part of the school net, or the school net's the maximum consolidation as well, which I think you'd have to look at all three of them in order to really do it, because as Dee mentioned before, there are cases where you've got a school out in a very rural area that's maybe not going to meet the mileage or time issue, but you're at maximum consolidation, and that's where there are quite a few NESS schools.
Well, why wouldn't you meet the maximum time? I mean, if you're a rural school out in the boonies by yourself, the next closest school is going to be quite a distance away, correct?
Yes, but not always.
Like I have schools that don't meet the mileage, but we meet based on maximum consolidation. I couldn't consolidate them into another school. So
how do you demonstrate maximum consolidation to an auditor?
Well, on our application, we go through and say, I have X amount of rooms, here's our staffing ratio, so there's this much room for students, and I have this many students, they can't all fit in the building.
So I think we, meaning the board, probably needs to develop better criteria on how to demonstrate, right, in a rule, because just saying maximum consolidation, we're getting things from, one statement that says yes to, if you close the school, it'll devastate our city. I mean, we're getting everything. And so it's really hard to compare you, who's probably, is doing that, to somebody else who may or may not be doing that. So I think if we go that route, I think we need a better definition of what that means and how to demonstrate it.
I think one thing to keep in mind with that is every district has different staffing ratios.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still got to be some flexibility for local decision making.
So it can't be done on a staffing ratio.
And if even within the same district, you have different staffing ratios. We've got Penguich High School that is a NESS school, and it has 125, 130 kids in it. And then we've got Escalante High School that has 60. And in order to have them be able to have all the classes, the staffing ratio is smaller at Escalante High School. Penguich High School, both of them being NESS schools. So even within the same district is what I'm saying, your staffing ratios have to change based on the demographics of that school.
Can I just ask a quick clarification question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, sir.
So we're looking at the county classification map, and of course, with our proximity in Tooele to Salt Lake, we're blue or third class. But I think our concern would be, but we're also 7,500 square miles, and the farthest school from the district office is 360 miles round trip out to Ibapaw. So we don't have a problem with. I just want to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying right. We don't have a problem with not applying for NESS, but we want to make sure there are multiple ways, because I wouldn't describe Stansbury as a rural district, but I would describe Grantsville and Dugway as in a rural. Of course they've qualified. So did I hear things right or wrong? We just want some clarification on that. Are you talking about doing it based just on that, or is there going to be some flexibility built in for how you qualify?
I think the question is trying to figure out what should the criteria be. something that can be reperformed or verified, because the one-way bus travel is really difficult to verify, and various districts are doing it different. A lot of our LEAs are qualifying under the maximum consolidation too, which is difficult to verify also, and we're not getting consistent documentation from school district to school district.
Well, Superintendent Carlson's not there, but Box Elder has the same concerns. They're listed as a Class 3 county, but you know, if you've been to Grouse Creek, you know that that's a necessary existing small school. So anyway,
Well,
we would just want to make sure that if we're talking about not having winners and losers, and that we're, you know, we would just make that point. But.
Well, okay, so we have a decision point here.
So
Dave, go ahead.
Well, I was just when we talked again as BAs, the idea of the county class being like the third prong of a stool was to eliminate the really subjective stuff. What you're saying, Jamie. Oh, it would really hurt our town if we didn't get NESS, or the superintendent feels this. It would be based off of consolidation, mileage, and class of county.
Is it mileage or time?
I think it's time in there.
It really ought to be time, not mileage,
Yeah.
because you know, different. You can drive 85 miles an hour. You can drive.
But the mileage is important for the exact reason that the superintendent was just saying. There's some NESS schools that aren't in those lower classes of county, but they're, you know, 50 miles, 100 miles out there. So the mileage is an important key.
Which is fine. We're just brainstorming, trying to figure out if there's a better way to determine eligibility for new schools coming on.
If you use A1 reports, you need to eliminate time for ineligible stops.
Correct.
Because you've got some where you're picking up at every house, and they're not far enough apart to be an eligible stop. So we eliminate the time on the approved route.
I'm thinking on the A1, maybe the A1 report doesn't give you the information you're looking for anyway, because on my A1 I don't have routes from one of my schools to the other school.
No.
So yeah, that logic isn't great.
It's hard to demonstrate that specifically. So we were trying to figure out, is there something easier on your end, easier for us to verify on our end, but still get to the same point?
And I think that was part of our point of trying to say, if you're in NESS school now, you stay in NESS school, and then you make the criteria for qualifying NESS school as being a new school that, say, Superintendent Lamborn builds a new school or has one that he's going to add, that the criteria would really be for new schools that are applying to NESS. You make the decision once up front, is this or is this not a NESS school, which we may go through that whole thing again. I don't have a problem with that, saying, okay, up front when we redo this, we say you are or you aren't, and then you are until you grow out of it, unless you're a new school, and then you set the criteria for new schools. To me, that makes it a lot more reasonable, because then you could be spending the time. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me for our district to be creating a bus route between this school and this school, which we don't have, because we're not sending kids there, and try and create that in all cases again and again and again to be able to say, yeah, we're still in that school, because it hasn't changed.
No, but if you're bringing on a new school and want to see if it's qualified, how do you demonstrate that? Because regardless of whether we're talking about existing or new schools, we still need to figure out how to measure eligibility. And how do you measure the transportation one way, 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes to the next nearest school?
Yeah. It's really easy if you can just pull up a Google map and it says it's 45 minutes by car, or more. That's really easy.
Right, but when it's on a dirt road at 10 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and on a car so you can get there in 20 minutes, but really on a bus it's something else.
30 miles, but we don't know how long it's going to take on a bus.
But I think we do know that, because you have to turn in your routes to the state transportation to get approved.
But there isn't a route for those.
Well, but
That's the
if they were creating one that would.
Yeah.
And, you know, any route that you're paying your bus driver for, you've got
For
how much time you're paying.
existing routes are easy.
Yeah,
It's the
existing
fact-
routes are easy.
The fact that, you know, if you're gonna consolidate, you're gonna do something you're not doing now. So
But when that happens, you still gotta create that route.
Right.
Well,
And
and-
you gotta
and-
turn that into the state, and you gotta pay a bus driver to ride it, so it's not gonna be hard to show what that is.
So that's kind of what I've been sitting here thinking. I mean, couldn't they submit reality? I mean, what it actually is, and certify that this is true and correct, and this is the actual time, and then your audit section could spot check a few things. I mean,
You know, and I would think an auditor, I mean, I can't imagine a business administrator or superintendent paying a bus driver more than they were paying to cover the hours, so if you turn in this is what it's.
The challenge I have is, and I'll just use an example, right now, I've got Escalante High School and I've got Bryce Valley, it's the closest one to it. We don't run a bus between the two right now, so I don't know what that route would be.
yeah, but couldn't
they're
you
they're
determine that?
covered.
I mean, couldn't you determine that? Couldn't you figure out what that would be?
We could, but doesn't make sense to spend that time every year and a half or whatever to do it again.
Well,
and again.
not every year.
If you were a new
What's up
school,
with
A
you
new
know,
school.
If it's a new school, I have no problem at all with it. It's-
Oh, yeah, that's
So
what
I think that's the
But if we,
distinction.
Yeah, if we make that
accept-
distinction, I'm good.
If we accept the grandfather of
Yeah.
who qualified in 2018, then we're just talking new.
So let's talk about that. Is it acceptable to everyone here that we can do the grandfathering type activity? Everyone? Any issues? Ben, Jacob? Or are we supposed to, you know, I'm just asking from your vantage points and your bosses, so to speak. Because if we don't do that, if we can't do that, and it's a non-starter, then we gotta figure it out. We gotta figure something else out, okay?
And I think we need the feedback from you guys.
Right.
If you've got places where it's not working now, where you think somebody's manipulating the game, then we need to address it. But if we feel comfortable with where we're at, then it seems like that would be the best fix. And in reality, there's gonna be some come on, but you're not gonna, in most rural communities, we're not gonna be adding schools. It's just not gonna happen. And so adding a ton of schools on the Wasatch Front, but that's not the issue. So I think we're talking about something will be rare.
Yeah, certainly.
And maybe I've got this wrong, but I haven't heard from the governor's office and a lot of legislators, but my understanding, what they're seeking, and everyone's excited about NESS, and there's other new money, governor, you know, it's like, it is a focus of nobody's criticizing it. However, my takeaway from this is somewhere in statute and rule, there's got to be a way to onboard a school, offboard a school, and consistently address and verify eligibility. I'm just keeping it simple, and we're not there. And I think the intent is that if you're a NESS school, that you're not, hopefully, with economic development and other things, different things that could possibly happen, and changes, and or end up with a consolidation or something, that there is movement on not everyone's a NESS school forever type attitude. And I think that's what they're looking at in statute, and I think we're looking at on the rule is how do we best deal with that. And I see some of the same challenges with not having things clearly defined. And I'll throw a whole different thing out, not to bring it all into this conversation here, but charters, how do you onboard them, how do you offboard them? But I think after listening to a few legislators that are watchful of this and very hopeful that there's a solution that will come, especially when they want to put more money into it, that on-board and off-board was part of it, whether you don't onboard very many in the future or you don't off-board, at least it's defined somehow.
Doesn't the enrollment off-board?
I would
Yeah,
say the
ADM.
offboarding is there with ADM. Because you'd grow right out of it.
I mean, there's some other issues with consolidation, but I think with ADM, it's the
I think
school
that's
that grows.
off-boarding. I think there's enough in there, but
Jake, you go first.
I was just, Scott, in response to your question about the grandfathering piece, just off the top of my head as I think about it, if the criteria are then different, if we've grandfathered schools that don't meet the criteria we put in place for new schools, do those schools then have a beef? Can they come and say, well, wait, I'm just exactly like this school, but I can't, they did it before? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, could you not, we stated a date in our proposal, but could you not do a reevaluation on that date based on the criteria of all the existing schools, and then in fact, grandfather those schools that you looked at, which would be the same NESS schools we have now. I mean, you wouldn't have any difference than the applications that we sent in last year. I don't think you'd have any difference whatsoever. But you may have to go through it one more time and say, yeah, these are all NESS schools, and then grandfather is that. Would that make you more comfortable?
Well, I'm not necessarily saying I'm uncomfortable, I'm just raising the question that I think of.
Would that be?
If schools are held to the same standard, I think you're okay.
And I think ultimately that's what we're seeking.
Yeah.
We're applying the rule to everything,
Right,
every
and
piece of the rule, or thing to everybody, so that they can, an auditor comes in and says, okay, we'll audit against this criteria, right? And then it flows, cascades.
I think the idea of grandfathering is we're saying that everybody's met that criteria. Any new school would have to meet the same criteria. Just get us out of the game of reapplying every year.
And wasn't some of the being more specific to get rid of these instances of justifying very vague justifications? So, Jamie, you talked about, and I don't know the specific instances, but the superintendent says we've got to have the school or our town will die. If that school gets grandfathered in, but there's no criteria to establish that that's a reason to be a NESS school, is that fair to future applicants? I'm just asking.
I would say no. Because isn't that the criteria piece? And I think that's a decision point we're on is, I'll just say towards the group that the deliverable is that we all agree on the criteria. Part of the overall deliverable is we all agree on the criteria. So no matter who is speaking to either the legislature or your local boards or all that we all know that that's, and I know it would take time to put it in and, go on it too, but otherwise I just, if we don't get to that point before January 28th, which is the first day of the legislative session, the risk rises even further. So, just saying. So, do we want to make sure we're all on the same page as far as criteria goes at this point? I really think that that's going to be the driver. Ben, do you have anything on that? Because that's really what we have to be able to know, right? We have to be able to know to be able to show why we made the decision we did to fund it at the level we did, right?
This does become very sticky.
Yes.
Mainly because there are also questions that with the formula that haven't really been addressed here that we've talked about at this point. Because in theory, you could have one kid that meets the transport or the distance requirement, and the school is classified as NESS.
Well, you shouldn't be measuring from a student's house. You should be measuring from school to school, technically.
But if you only have one school, is that a NESS school then?
I thought the rule just says one-way bus travel for a student.
It's a school.
It's
a
from one school to another school.
So from an assigned school to the nearest school.
So that indicates to me, should it be switched to a student qualification measure? That a student is on a bus, regardless of where they're coming from, where they're going, within that district, to their school, their boundary school, if their travel is more than 45 minutes for an elementary school one way, then they qualify.
Does that make sense, Ben, though? Because you may have a school that's been consolidated. I mean, 45 minutes, but you've got a 500 student school that they've been assigned to. So it wouldn't qualify, say, for example, under the ADM qualifications, but yet you've got one student that's way out there that has to come in because there's no other place for them to be, that school then qualifies for NESS. That's the only, there might be instances.
Well, and I guess there's a question there too on consolidation, is how long does that last? Do you get do you basically, once you've consolidated, are you in forever? Or does after a while that drop off? You can't say, well, 30 years ago we consolidated the school, and so now we have this student here, I'm not expressing it very well, but we're still qualifying for NESS. Well, you can't go back to the school that you once and unconsolidate, I guess. So I can see that's the only thing that I'm having some of a grandfather is I don't know from a policy perspective what other questions will come up as far as eligibility, school size. So it makes sense given the current proposal until something happens greater with the formula.
Because we will talk about the formula.
Can I just put something out as far as a consolidation issue? One of the things that I've thought about is, we could consolidate a lot of schools in our state. But if we did that, we would be forcing local boards to go out to bond. Because their current facilities do what they need to do and may meet the criteria and capability of the schools. But if you wanted to say, yeah, because you're a little too close, you're going to have to consolidate those, then the board, and they don't have room to consolidate it, to move those two schools into one, then the local board would then have to go out and bond to create additional facilities at one location so that the other kids can come in. And those are I think we've got quite a few instances that they may not quite meet the travel criteria, but the local boards, and sometimes it's been 30 years since they've made that decision. Those decisions were made that's where the schools were going to be, and some of it is dependent on communities, where communities were originally.
And the other piece to that is you're not going to pass a bond to walk away from two existing facilities and pay additional monies to move to a central facility and build, because the taxpayers they're not going to vote for that.
So that's just a question, are we going to somehow force consolidation, maximum consolidation, those sort of things. So I think that's an issue.
In my situation, I got only one middle school, one high school. I got two elementaries. Two elementaries are 20 miles apart, but to walk away from either one and build a facility, and both elementaries are basically maxed out. To walk away from either one and then build one somewhere else, that bond would not pass. Or build on the one
I
and
can
walk away
pass a
from the
bond
other
to
one.
combine South Severe and Richfield, just like, and Millard, I don't think it would ever fly to pass a bond to combine Delta and Millard High together. It's not really.
Suggested.
But superintendent, on those two schools that you just mentioned, the drive time between the two is what, do you think?
On a bus, 30 minutes, because
Okay,
you got a
so-
canyon in.
Right, so you don't meet the transportation requirement,
No.
so that's out, but you're meeting the consolidation requirement because you consolidate. So there's a perfect example of why or what we should do for eligibility, because a lot of examples are just like that, where the transportation is not the second criteria.
That's why you've got to
that
have,
you're-
I think, the 3 prongs that Chad talked about. Because just one in isolation, you know, and if you lived your whole life in Davis County, that doesn't make sense, but it's reality.
Carrie, did you?
I'm just thinking, I know it's kind of subjective, but I like the other criteria that's still in there about, you know, that the superintendent can consider other things, community type things. Because I'm just sitting here thinking about if we were trying to bring what we call the valley over to Kanab, a half-hour bus drive. I mean, the communities are kind of built around the schools to a certain extent, and it would kind of destroy a community. And I know it's in Arizona, but 7 miles away from Kanab, south of Kanab, is Fredonia, Arizona. And, you know, we have offered a number of times over the years to accommodate their students, to bring them in, but it would destroy that community. I mean, so I like multiple considerations. I understand what you're saying about simplifying things, but I don't know. I think it's been working pretty good. I know we need to address some of the concerns you've got, but I think it's been working pretty good. It's kind of a complex area, and I think, to my knowledge, most districts are happy with it. That's kind of what we, as we met as business managers, that we think most of them don't think it's necessarily perfect, but it's working pretty good. And so I would wish that if we could get the formula to where you're comfortable, I mean the distribution formula, I wish we could move forward. I don't know that necessarily some of the other formulas are perfect. Some of the ways some of the others work, the WPU, some of the others, the administrative formulas, you know, I don't know that those are perfect either.
Jimmy, do you think?
I'm done. I would say that they're not.
And
but
so
this is the one under scrutiny right now.
I agree.
Professional staff is coming. That will likely be
that's
next.
what I was thinking. Professional staff.
All right, let's stay on NESS.
Can I ask one question, Jamie? One of the points you made earlier is you want to be able to have an auditor come in and be able to deal and be able to look at it and say, yep, you met, and I don't blame you for that.
Yeah,
but at the same time, can you, with an auditor, work through some of these more subjective issues, like the current rule says that the superintendent has the ability to look at it and say, yep, that's a NESS school, and that's happened. I know Martel Minlove did that while I was down here. He looked at it and said, yep, that's going to be a NESS school. And it didn't necessarily meet all the criteria, but he had the ability to do that based on board rule. As long as there is someone who's given that responsibility and makes that judgment call, is the auditor going to question the judgment call, or do you just need to have the backup to say, superintendent, state superintendent, or state board, wherever we want to go with it, looked at it and said, yeah, that's going to be a NESS school?
Well, from being a former auditor, right? If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So if you can't show documentation to an auditor on,
right. But
on
if you
some
could,
decision,
if you could show the documentation on the decision based on some of the subjective criteria, everything else we're looking at is very objective. It's very easy to.
Yeah,
those are
EDM's
objective.
easy to
It's the
verify.
subjective pieces that I
Right.
know are probably
the transportation / consideration issues that are
and so
very hard.
If you were able to have somebody, either with a committee, a superintendent, a state board, look at it and document that they made these decisions, that yes, these are NESS schools based on their decision, is that enough to?
I think that's a decision for our board. They want to go that route.
And here's the other piece of this. Having been on those committees like that, they usually say, well, what criteria am I basing this on? And if it's a subjective criteria, okay, but then typically they defer to a superintendent anyway. You know, they say that. So you run into, ultimately we run into the same situation no matter what, because I can't speak for the board, I never would speak for the board, but that's what they're gonna say. They're gonna say, even if we establish a committee that reviews this, the committee has to know what the criteria is. And if you don't give them the criteria, then they're gonna say, well, I'm not gonna say that you can or can't do this, because you're not giving me the specifications, the guardrails, I guess, however you wanna describe it, to do that.
I'm just thinking that.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm not disputing what you're saying, but you know the deal too.
I do, I know where you're
both
coming
in that
from, but
situation.
there's sometimes there's something
I
that's
know.
gonna be outside of the box, is all I'm saying.
Well,
That somebody's
and I
gonna
think
have
that's
to.
the community concern.
Yeah, that, and it may be the community,
And
it may
that's
be
fine.
something else.
But
So-
my experience and my understanding is that that's not good enough. That's not good enough. We have to have criteria so that we all can explain to a legislator why the decision was to designate that school, not just a legislator, anybody else, why that was a what criteria did we base that on? You know, period. It doesn't matter if you're on a committee, if you're a board member, we have to get to that point. Right, Ben? Or
Well, yeah, and so this is, I think, the first time this one's come up, hasn't it?
Well,
the ability
yeah.
of the superintendent, because personally, I think at the very least, it should be the State Board of Education making that determination.
Okay.
Because that action is committing state dollars. And so,
Yeah.
from my position, I'd almost say it would need to be approved by the subcommittee, but I won't go that far, because that action of doing that, of designating a school that doesn't meet criteria as a NESS school is costing the state money. And as the appropriators of that money, the legislature should have a role in that. They may opt to defer that to the State Board of Education under the program. But when you do that, it adds WPUs to that program for that school to come on, in theory, and you're committing those state resources. So this conversation has caused me more pause. But I do think you need to have...
Why is it causing you more pause, though?
Well, just because, it's highlighting that things have happened, again, in this formula.
Okay.
That,
Yes.
we may have schools out there right now that aren't meeting our criteria for NESS.
And I understand that. That's why we talked about the grandfather piece, right?
And that's why I'm less
Okay, yep.
okay with the grandfather.
Okay, right, okay. Understand.
But like I said, I can't speak for the subcommittee. I can certainly tell them my opinion on that. But I do think we have to have some type of criteria. And I don't know that it necessarily has to be more than Google Maps between these two schools. Or if you're making an application for NESS, you're going to get enough money out here to at least go justify driving a bus over that route. To measure how long it's going to take, I would think a school district wanting to get a school verified or qualified for NESS would be willing to do that. So I think you can. I think you do have to have a time requirement, because that's really what everything has been based on up to this point, is that time requirement, whether it be between two schools or the student time on the bus. That could be up for debate. I think everyone's kind of settled on the grade bands, or the population bands, but we need some additional work on that. And so if you meet those two criteria, and maybe a population density, and then the superintendent says, well, we fall out of all these three categories, but I still think you're a NESS school, then they can take that to the State Board of Education and say their justification as to why. And then at least at that point you have elected people making a decision to commit those resources, despite what the objective categories say, or subjective categories, whatever.
And I'm never one to ask for a form. But I may suggest, because in our very first meeting, part of Natalie's frustration seemed to be the quality or lack of quality in the application. And I sensed a real frustration with her on that. Some just said, well, this is the way it's been, or, and others came up with pretty good reasons. So, like I said, I hate to ever suggest a form, but maybe we need a form to come to superintendents, business administrators, with the criteria, whatever we finally decide on. But I think we've got basically the three prong that we're getting closer to. And then we address that. And then if there's questions, we can go to the legislature or to Ben or to John, President Huntsman, and just Chairman Huntsman, what are you, Doctor? I don't know, Mr. Anyway, this guy, and we basically say, okay, this school is iffy, here's the scenario, then the state board makes that decision, then you have something for your auditor, and then we're okay. Because I think in most cases, I think we're meeting the enrollment. I think enrollment's not the issue, and that's a biggie. The mileage thing, and if we have to go individual or whatever we have to do, I think, we'll meet there. Maximum consolidation in and of itself, there might be a few iffies on that, but that combined with the other two, I think we can do it. And then these two gentlemen, or three gentlemen, that are under a different ordering who they report to, have got something and it's clear. And then, we mentioned early on with charter schools, there's a process, comes to the board. So these schools have all clearly met it based on the reporting form that we gave them. And if they didn't, then they come to the board, and then you've got your audit trail, and then Ben has an audit trail. It seems like that would make it easier. And before Chairman Huntsman leaves, can I just go off on a rant that's a little different? It's not a rant, it's a concern. Because I've expressed the concern multiple times till you guys are tired of hearing from it. But the thing that scares me with the governor's proposal of new money for rural schools is not the concern that we don't need the money, but now Wasatch Front and Davis schools, or Davis and the Big East are saying, wait a minute, they're already getting NESS money, now we're adding another pot of money, why? And that concerns me, especially, and I don't know what the criteria is going to be to qualify, if it's just being rural. And there again, is Iron County rural? Well, according to some definitions it is. According to population, probably not. And so I as we get into that piece, we've already getting scrutinized on what NESS is. We had another one that says rural in front of it. Are we going to get, twice as much scrutiny, or is it going to be easier? And that really, and again, please don't think that I'm not appreciative of what's trying to happen there. I just think it draws attention, and we're going to be back in the same. I need water. It's going to be back in the same thing, trying to justify something.
I'm not leaving. I'm going to go grab some waters. How many do we need here?
So anyway, I got off, but I want
I'm coming back.
the chairman to hear that before he left.
Well, I haven't left yet, but you can give me a hand?
Yeah.
All right, we'll be back.
I don't know why this group makes me so damn nervous.
Ben down there, he just makes people nervous. No, I'm just kidding, man.
So can we agree to try the criteria and do it on a form and?
I want the BAs to respond to that, because
So,
It's really not a whole lot different than what we're doing biannually anyway.
So criteria, are we talking about just ADM and transportation and no consolidation, or yes consolidation? And if
I think you got it all.
But the question, to me, the one still question is, State Board rule still says the superintendent can look at other factors, including community and whatever. How do we, and so that's what I was trying to say, is there a way to retain that?
Well, can I just, online is, I guess I'm going to respectfully disagree with Dale Lamborn and say that, just because it's Iron County or just because it's Tooele or whatever, we're not talking about rural schools funding. It's not called necessary existing rural schools. It's called necessary existing small schools. You could have a small school, whether it's Box Elder County or whatever, that, the county characteristics are different. I don't think we're talking about rural. I don't think we need to get it mixed up with the rural schools initiatives. I don't think it's one and the same. I think NESS schools aren't just designed for rural schools, but that's my opinion.
I want to make one comment on, I think Ben's thinking about it a little bit too, this time on the bus, you know. I think the way it's written right now, it's the time from school to school. But in reality, you might have a student that's 30 minutes on past that school. I mean, we have that in some scenarios. And so, I mean, you don't want that student on the bus 3 hours. Whereas from school to school, so I think that's a little bit of an issue too. You know, I don't know where to go with it exactly.
All of our routes run for an hour to get to the first school. Now you're 30 minutes.
One of the my second point would be, I remember when Natalie said when we first met that the main goal wasn't to change the funding or have schools that were currently funded or qualified, anyway.
I still think we just have to, we have to land on the criteria. Please. What's the criteria?
What do you think, Jamie?
Well, let's talk transportation. So if we take Ben's comments, is it of the population that's attending that school, is it the furthest student to transport them from their house to the school? I think that could be easily identifiable through a Google map. Are we talking about if that school went away, transporting the entire student body to the next closest school, whether that is in or not in the same district? Thoughts? Something else to do with transportation?
Yeah, let's establish the transportation.
I think it's got to be the furthest kid to the next qualifying school. This commingling of districts thing has me concerned. At some point, we got to step back and say, does this really work in the real world? Like, can I take Salina kids and say, you've got to go to Gunnison now?
Animal Elementary
That's where I
School
got the idea.
is in Animal.
We do that.
You went out there, and they go to Junction in Paiute for high school. So yeah, it is happening right now in some schools, because it just makes sense. So some kids go to different.
It's a lot.
I mean, there's history, there's families for generations and generations that are North Severe alumni, and now you're going to go into that community and say, no, you're now a Gunnison Bulldog, not a North Severe Wolf, because your school just lost
state funding for it. I mean, that's really what we're doing.
Yeah.
Is determining whether or not you get state funding for these schools.
Yeah, and
that
school couldn't exist in its manner without the funds it gets through NESS.
Yeah.
Just point blank, it couldn't.
Can I throw in one concern I have, one little one, and then I'll be leaving, but when we talk about take that furthest student, that student that's further, that student's only in the system for how long? And that student can be here today and gone in 2 weeks or 1 month, and I don't think that criteria is going to hold up well, unless you're looking at it every year to justify that furthest student. I'm just throwing that out. Only because I wanted to contribute something to the conversation.
No, I would agree. Unless you change the entire NESS formula to a student-based formula, then it probably doesn't make much sense to, since we're doing a school-based, you're qualifying a school as opposed to students. I've mentioned before I would love to look at doing this as a school-based formula, but that's going to be a large project. But if you're as a student-based formula, but if you're doing this as the school itself is qualifying, I think then your criteria of to the next available school is okay, knowing that the local is going to make that decision as to whether or not they want their student on the bus for an hour and a half, 2 hours every morning. They're not going to want to make that decision. And so they're likely not going to consolidate at that point.
One question that we need to look at in this criteria as well is if I remember right, the number of minutes is established in board rule, not in statute. So therefore, is it, I mean, if we're going to be looking at what the different sizes of schools and whatever should be, should we also be evaluating, is 45 minutes for an elementary school student the right number of minutes? I mean, those were subjectively identified at some point by someone, and we don't know that any more than we know what happened with the regression formula. So is that up for discussion as well? Is 45 minutes the
Well, that's what's nice about rewriting the script here.
Mm-hmm. Or should it be less or more, is the question I have, and I don't have an answer for it. Do we need to look at that? Because I think there are a number of schools that are going under maximum consolidation because of that time element. And so is it too far? Is it too long? Or is it, I don't know.
You could say the same for the ADM bands. Same thing. Those were established a long time ago as well.
And they're somewhat.
Can I chirp in here for a minute?
Sure.
This is Sam.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to address the time on the bus issue. Just because it takes a certain amount of time for the bus to drive from the student's house to the school does not mean that's how long the student is on the bus. The problem is, in your small communities, you have the students who can walk to school in the center of town or surrounding the school, but you have students on all sides of the school that have to ride the bus to school. And in many cases, you don't have enough kids to do 10 different routes. You have enough kids for one route. So you can have a kid live 10, 15 minutes from the school walking who qualify for a bus who are on the bus for an hour and a half because you're going to drive all the way around the entire school to pick up all the kids on the one bus. So there's a number of students required for a bus route to be approved. There's distances involved. There's trying to be as efficient as possible. We have 2 NESS schools, and we have kids riding on a bus for a long time just to get to those NESS schools. So I don't know if just deciding one distance for one student to the school really determines how long a student has to be on a bus. I think the current criteria seems to be working. I would hate to see us diverge from that without talking to actual transportation directors, of which I was one. I hope that makes sense.
Probably better than a student.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're okay with that, right? I mean, I think we arrived at the conclusion that it just has to be school to school.
Mm-hmm.
Is that everybody okay with that? Because when we get into the formulas, I think that'll help solidify that a little bit more, you know. So what, you feel good about the transportation criteria, Jamie?
So we're doing school to school within the next similar type school. So we're talking elementary to elementary or secondary to secondary within this district boundary.
And would it be based on a bus route that would take the students from that school to the other school?
It would have to be on a bus route. The problem is trying to,
right.
we're back to the same.
It goes back to the same thing. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Yep.
In a way. It's really tough to establish when it's not there. If any stops along the way or wouldn't there, how many, whatever. Because you have students that will be in that school now, but would you be picking up other kids as well? I don't know.
But is that a showstopper? Is that a deal breaker to this whole thing?
No, I think that's.
Can we all live with that? Can we all just know that that's just out there?
One of the questions I have there is, are we talking, I just don't know whether, we never got to a conclusion on the grandfathering. Are we talking about every school has to do this periodically? Or are we talking about new schools that are applying NESS? Just
What I heard is they have to do, we have to do it periodically. We'd have to renew every year. Just because we'd have to be able to show that in an audit that we're still not sending school without some criteria.
I don't think we're doing it every year now.
Well, yeah.
We have started doing it.
Yeah. Sort of, kind
Because
of.
the state board rule doesn't define how often.
Right. So, well, we
And
do
on
that though.
I would be, we're going into fiscal year 2020 here, right? So is there a problem to make all of your schools reapply for fiscal year 2020 and then do it on a 5-year review?
Yeah, let's do that.
5 years would be better than ever.
It's a good proposal.
Yeah, I don't know what the.
Because, and unless you fall out of ADM naturally.
Yeah.
Somebody might
But-
say 2 to 3, I think.
We gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, I mean,
So.
I can see the point. Your schools aren't changing that much. You're not
Right.
going to fall off.
Right.
It's only if you're going to really create one. So maybe in 5 years, the board will come back and say, well, it doesn't really make sense for us to go through this again. Let's move it to I don't know.
So what?
But I think you may want to, I can see the point of having some review there and then wanting to have a review and then take that up at some other point.
So Ben, here, we kind of did that. We sent out a certification, said, did anything change with any of your schools? The BAs wrote back, nope. We said, okay, great.
Yeah,
No need
and
to
it could
reapply.
Hey, let's write it down, because everyone's nodding their head, yes.
You said something about it
Oh,
5 minutes ago. You tried to define it. I liked it. Can you say it? Do you remember what you said?
No, tell me what I
You said transportation from school to school,
yes.
within district.
Within district boundaries, that's what I wrote down. I wrote down I wrote ADM, so we still have the ADM criteria. The transportation is school to school within the school district boundary. Okay, and then I have a 3 or 5 year review
What about
with maybe an annual certification that nothing has changed between the time you apply to when you need to reapply.
Okay, but did you have maximum consolidation?
I haven't got that far, we're still on
No,
transportation.
I'm sorry, I won't interrupt you.
Hey, thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Hey, you're doing a great job. Getting close. Thank you.
And I like the term that Ben used a minute ago when he said available school. Because I think that might deal with some of that consolidation issue that came up earlier. Because yeah, we could consolidate, but that would mean a bond to build a new school.
Right.
So, and of course, then you could get in the argument, well, what does available mean? But available means there's room to put them there,
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah, and even on the out of district thing, if there is a question as a school is closer, I would think all you'd have to do is explain why that's not an option. Maybe there's not capacity in that school, or that district is just so hard to work with.
So I added next available school within the district that has student capacity.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Okay.
So we're rolling right into consolidation. How do we define that fits what you guys want to see? Because you are going to get into different, like I staff at 28-1 at my high schools. I don't know what Duchesne does or what Kane does.
So there's some criteria in the open enrollment regulations.
What
about-
constitutes a classroom? What?
Yeah, define, there's formulas there. You take your school and your average class size across the district, and from that you can create what the capacity of that school is and whether you're above or below. And so a lot of that's already defined in there. You could piggyback off of that.
Would that work okay in this situation where the smaller the school to cover all your subjects, you have different staffing ratios? Do you think that we'd be okay?
Or if you have a really small school that has 10 kids, you still have to have a teacher there.
Math, science,
Because the teachers.
Usually a school like that's going to meet the mileage, right?
Necessarily.
Well,
I guess what does it mean?
Class.
Okay, hang on a second.
Which
Uh,
grade?
district
Which
wide.
is for that grade or staffing. And
Hold on a second. So Jamie asked the question,
I just said, what does it mean to be consolidated? I guess we need some
I think we need to
criteria.
start there first. I think that's a good question.
Well, to me, you've reached max consolidation when you can't fit the kids that are in a
Mean
school.
student capacity.
Yeah, so
So you could move those.
if I were to
schools
close
the
down
next closest
one
school.
high school, I can't fit them in the next closest high school.
Can I, just for clarification, so instead of, there's a foreseeable problem like in Vernon. Vernon isn't as remote as Ibapaw, but they're a NESS school. I was just asking Lark how they qualified originally, and it was a long time ago. They qualified as a necessary existing small school. But so they may be 35 miles from the next school within district, but there may be kids that live to the south of that towards Tentic that, that are further. So, are we talking about just school to school or also from the student's home residence to whatever that school would be? Does that make sense?
So the
reason I'm asking about that is we're building a new school right now in Vernon that will require NESS funding. And, that's why we're really strong on the whole grandfathering idea. I don't know that we currently meet the mileage requirement, so we're going to pull that funding and go tell that community that they're no longer necessarily existing because they're 35 miles from the school in Settlement Canyon in Tooele, even though some of their people live 40 miles from their school.
I wonder if he'd meet other criteria like maximum consolidation and things like that.
Yeah, so sir, this is Scott.
Yeah.
You might be able to meet other criteria though, right? If you don't meet the transportation, it doesn't mean you're out. It just means, there's other criteria. That's why we're trying to make sure that we're going through all the criteria. So, because to me, it's not an and, it's
possible, but we may have gotten in on that school with the superintendent other considerations. And so, if you were me and you were building a $2 million school and you had your funding all set up and it was a NESS school, et cetera, and all those decisions were made and you're our school board and then this committee would recommend a change to that, we would have a lot of heartburn over that. And when we initially met, that wasn't the issue that was brought up, that Natalie brought up as far as the concerns about the NESS formula or the work group. Is not let's figure and redo our eligibility criteria so that some schools get kicked out. That just can't happen in my mind.
Doesn't it say school to school in here already?
Yeah, it's school to school, so I don't think we didn't change that.
No, that's always been a rule. It's in the rule right now. It's always been an eligibility criteria. We're just trying to better define so we can better manage, better verify.
Yes.
And so I know for sure, if I understand.
We've applied every 2 years and we've done the application and it's been approved. So why would it change now for that particular school? It shouldn't, right?
Unless you grow out of it.
They've got 21 kids. Not growing out of that.
So it goes to your, max consolidation probably doesn't play in because they can probably fit 21 kids in one or other.
Right, because they're growing out of that area.
So superintendent, on a bus, how long would it take your students to travel from the current school that they're at to the next current? Are we talking an elementary school or a secondary school?
Yeah, so K6 down in Vernon, 21 kids, and the next nearest school is probably, I don't have the mile minute report, but it's what, 35 miles?
About 35, maybe 40 minutes. That's what I turn in every time.
Minutes
or
miles?
Use the Google Map. It's minutes. Because you use the Google Maps every time I apply, but we've always got the funding there, and I worry about necessarily consolidation. I'm glad you guys point that out because we got a school here that you can fit 21 students in if you really wanted to do that, technically. So how do you, but my point is, this community, we got in the whole conversation of do we change it or not, and how do you go out to that community and say we're taking your school away when we've just been through it and they came there pleading, keep our school, this is important to us.
Would this necessarily do that?
So Lark, you're saying, I like how I look up. Lark, you're saying that on Google Maps, which is by a car, it's somewhere between 35 to 40 minutes.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that on a bus ride, it would be longer than 35 or 40 minutes.
Yes, using the logic that they have to stop and pick up kids, but how do you define that? When you're putting these criterion, you just look at Google Maps from here to here says 40 minutes.
Right, and that's my point. Is that
we don't even have that route. We'd have to run it because those kids, we don't bus those kids. They're farm kids in Vernon. If you've ever been out to Vernon, some of those kids actually, Tintic School District buses into our district. When I was in Idaho, you couldn't do that, but in Utah, you apparently can. So they send a bus in and take 50 of our kids from Vernon to go to Tintic. So we have this, we'd like to say no to that so that we can have more kids and provide more, But anyway, another topic. But so the 21 kids that are left, we don't even provide busing and bus stops to them. If we did that, we'd probably just run, I don't know, we'd have to come up with a bus route scenario to look at how long they would be going to Settlement Canyon. Settlement Canyon is past Stockton into Tooele. It's the south part of Tooele, so we're talking about the south part of our county. But anyway.
No, and I think this illustrates my point, is that trying to verify a 40-minute bus route from one school to another is difficult to do, because if you just look at Google Maps, you're looking at a car ride, which does not take into consideration the bus stops and bus speed and some other things, correct? That was my point to begin with, is that this transportation eligibility criteria is difficult for the state board or whoever committee is going to review the applications to determine whether or not you're eligible and you meet this specific criteria. Unless we...
I'm not trying to slide anything in. It was my understanding from the very beginning when kind of ground rules were set and said, this is the problem we have. At that point in time, it was made explicitly clear that we're not trying to cut funding to any schools, that we all agreed that everybody needed more funding. So, whether if it was rich, if it was severe, if it was in any of these other counties that possibly had a school dropping off, they'd be speaking up right now as well.
Do you think the grandfathering, whatever, could we do something like that?
Well, I think is there a possibility of either running a bus on a route from said school to the next school and documenting that one time for your application 1 year and showing and demonstrating that it's taking at least 45 minutes to take those kids from one school to the next closest school of the same type within your district?
Well, yes, we could. I guess my confusion, and maybe it's something I heard Scott say earlier, that he judges it from the school to school. That's easy to do on a Google map, but what he's referring to is outside of Vernon, you have Lofgren. Hopefully I'm saying that right. That using the Google Maps, I've always submitted two, you'll notice, because Lofgren, that goes into Vernon, is actually 45 minutes on the Google map to this nearest school. So the route would have to pick up kids from there, go down into Vernon, pick up all the other kids, and then make it into the Settlement Canyon.
So when we're doing that route, it's not going to be from school to school distance. It's going to be from furthest house wherever that kid lives, because that would be the route.
That's what I'm saying. You time it from the full route or from simply school to school.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. Maybe try a different view of it. So if you did take a bus and went from, just as you described, the two schools you described, if you went from one school to the other, what would that distance and time be on a bus? If you could show us that, or not just us, but everybody, I think we'd be fine, right?
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying.
That's what we're saying.
Demonstrating that.
Yeah, 45 minutes, but it may be just below it. If it came in at 43 or 40.
School because we're funding it by school, that's... Because really,
I don't know when the rule came into effect, but I'll just give you a simple example. When the rule came into effect, the speed limit might have been 55, 65, And back when this school was, like I said, it's the heart of the community. You're going to tell you're going to close it just because this is going to happen 10 years down the road when you have different technology getting from point A to point B and you have a 45-minute bus ride. It changed.
What do you think, Ben?
Try to decide whether I'd be quiet. Because I don't think the local situation should dictate whether or not you get state money for your school.
It absolutely should. Absolutely should have.
But if you don't meet the criteria and there's no reason for you to meet the criteria, why should you be a NESS school?
Then you should have told us. Then you should have told us that based on our application every 2 years for the last 20+ years, right?
The legislature can come in tomorrow and change all of this. None of this is guaranteed.
When we started this discussion, Natalie specifically said we weren't talking about any money being at risk. We're talking about ways where everybody would be funded more money. So I just disagree with you. It's not called, it's called necessarily existing. And now, sure, the legislature could redefine what necessary means or what small means. It doesn't say rural county money.
No,
it doesn't
the
say
superintendent,
long distance bus ride money.
You also said in that meeting that if a school is getting money that they're not supposed to be getting, why are they getting it?
See, I think that between now and then, if we just, and you know, I'll come out there. I have my bus driver license. I'll drive the bus.
We can get that done. That's not the point.
Right. No,
the
I know.
scope creep and the interpretation, you know, around the rulemaking in this committee is just, I mean, and that's fine because we can go to our legislators and go that route and say, hey, what was the original intent? What's the intent of this group? You know, that's fine.
Can we revisit the school versus the student? In my mind, it's still a school-based, even if, because it's the route to the school, which I know Chair Huntsman said, well, that's going to change, but if we're re-evaluating every 5 years, we would resubmit the route based on the farthest student, and it seems like that makes the most sense. It's the amount of time your kid is sitting on the bus to get to the next school, and Superintendent from DeWitt is right. I mean, he's got that community that's 30 miles past the school. You don't really want those kids sitting on that bus for an extra 30 minutes to get to the next closest school.
Well, my understanding though with that is that we'd have to look at a different formula on a student base. You know, and so
I guess that's what I'm saying is why do we have to do that?
The question I asked earlier was, is 45 minutes right? And maybe that's the way we look at it is, do we say, okay, if you've got a 45-minute and then you've got kids that are out 30 minutes from that, do you really want a kid on a bus for adding those two together, which would be, 65, 70 minutes? Do we really want them on there? So maybe the 45 is not correct. That was, again, was created a long time ago, and we don't know why. Maybe it should be 40, maybe it should be 30, to take into account for the fact that kids do live farther out than that.
Could you capture that? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Could you capture that with the average for those students to get to the current school and add that to school time?
That's what I was thinking is if you did a complex, a two-pronged approach on that. So basically there's the distance between the school and the school, which you can have as 45 minutes or a half hour or whatever. Well, maybe leave that at 45 since that's established, but make it so the overall bus time, if you were to consolidate from where you're transporting the students to the new one, not to exceed maybe an hour and 15 minutes or an hour, whatever that is. So you have that two-pronged approach. Does that make sense?
So are you doing the time from the furthest student to get to the...
I kind of like Jacob's concept to do an average of the students that are riding the buses to the school.
Right.
Because that's not going to change as much.
Right.
He doesn't have any students right now.
But that wouldn't fix their problem.
I guess that's true.
But you have to,
that's a good point.
That's what he brought up, because he doesn't have any students riding buses. They live in a farm community.
That's a good point.
So that's why I tried to say, just drive the bus.
Drive a bus. Yeah.
Just drive the bus from one school to the other school, and maybe we look at the 45 minutes, right? I mean,
and maybe the way there might be other isolated situations. If we come up with a good criteria and we leave in the caveat that the state superintendent can evaluate and make a determination. That puts a lot of pressure, not the state superintendent, the state board. That puts a lot of pressure on that, but it might, because I don't think when you really go out and evaluate those situations, there's going to be very many, but we still have a fallback position, and then we're not trying to write rules for 99% that are getting eaten up by the 1%.
Right. And maybe if you know, because you might also have one that's 44 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, and that becomes, the downside to that is then you're put back, but from your position, when the auditors come, you know, these are the criteria because of this uniqueness, went to the board made this decision, it's covered for the audit, and you're okay.
Yeah, we'll just change our district policy, drive our buses quite a bit slower, and stop at the railroad crossing for another 3 or 4 minutes, so no problem.
All right, so how about we try this? How about we stick with the school to school. We establish the criteria in here, then we give, I know we're pressed for time here, but we let everybody run the scenarios like is being done right now by Superintendent Rogers in his situation, which is fine. Otherwise, we're gonna keep coming back with the military proverbially calls the doom loop, right? We just keep looping back.
We've been in that doom loop.
Right, I know, we gotta break out of the doom loop, okay? We gotta get out of that and just say, so, you know, I understand his concerns, I think we all do, you all have them, but we have to move on the criteria. We have to get off the criteria so we can get to the formula, you know, and make sure we're good on that.
So what's a good way of going about moving the time from like 45 minutes to 30?
I think we can do that by rule. We can do that.
How do we justify 30 minutes versus 45 minutes?
I think if we all agree to it, if we all agree to how we do that, I think that's fine, even if Ben does.
So would it make any sense to do what who was it, Ben said, or you said take an average of the students, the time into their school, and then add that on the time from school to school? I mean, with that?
Fine. I mean, Jamie, would that be a criteria that could be used, and that if they put that on the application, it would survive an audit and be clear on that work?
The rule was set when we had dirt roads, so going from 45 to 30, probably a good.
Dropping the times.
I wonder if that just fixes it, just drop it.
We're not doing this other stuff.
Isn't 45 minutes the special ed rule for?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. I remember that from when I was at USDB. Because we ran into that problem when we contracted.
So drop it to 30, and
so you're still under the mind.
Actually, it's 70 minutes. It's 70 minutes total time. So round trip. So that's 35.
So we use that somewhere, 35.
Well, then we'd be covering for the special ed children. So students.
You know, so you get some consistency at least. Right.
Try that.
Then you have
And I'm gonna check and make sure that's still the case.
So
That's
35
probably
for private elementary.
that's got to be a federal criteria.
Yeah, and I don't think
We would support the 35 if it was school to school. Otherwise, we think that you should include at least an average trip of the furthest route, because we're going to have to bus those routes further along.
Put a pin in that,
Okay,
verify that,
Okay.
we'll come back and check that out.
Is that okay? Good point. All right, let's move on.
So do we want to talk about consolidation, or are we moving
We
on?
gotta talk about consolidation.
Okay.
My definition of consolidation would be you cannot take the students from the school that you have now and move them in. There's just not room and capacity for the nearest school of like type.
So is there
Like type.
Okay, like type?
Or just student configuration, whatever, grade configuration.
I think like
Talking
type's important
elementary,
because you're going to have
elementary,
different.
secondary.
You're going to have different school classifications. Some districts have a 6-8 versus a 7-9, and I don't think we want to get into the game of dictating how districts establish their grade levels. But It still comes down to staff. I mean, how do you define the classrooms, teachers per, or students per classroom?
You could go back to what Dee was saying, because we have to right now figure out whether schools open or close for open enrollment. So that you could use that same similar criteria and then be consistent.
Where's that criteria?
I don't remember.
It's in the open enrollment statutes, or rule, or whatever that is. Yeah, where we have students coming across the border, we are familiar with that rule.
I'm not familiar with
But
that.
you wouldn't not worried about that yet. They kept do that for in any of your schools in the district. Was any one of them? There's a set of rules. You have to calculate what your average is and whether that school's above the average or not, and then you can. If it's not, then you can't close it. If it is, you can at certain points.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Consolidation, JB, do you feel still need some more?
I'm okay if I'll just reiterate and we can move on from there. So consolidation is that if the next like school type, if they already have a max student capacity, then I cannot physically move those kids to that same school. And if you can demonstrate that by open enrollment or some sort of process that you've documented and you attach that and send that for consolidation, I don't see any problem. Does anyone else have comments?
No, I think that's what
Okay.
has been well.
Okay, we good to move on?
Yes.
Some of this we've already talked about. So we talked about the ADM splits that are currently listed in statute and regurgitated in board rule. So right now we don't have either a K-12 band or a K-8 or a K-9 band. We've already discussed that. We've also discussed the regression formulas were developed back in, I think, cost using 2011. I'm not comfortable with just manually adjusting them, not based on any data or criteria. Our suggestion here is to take the 2018 student level reporting data and run some regression tables based on that data, and then also do it again for 2019 when we probably will have better school level reporting data at that point, and do some new regression models based on all of the various grade bands that we need, whether that's K6, K12, K8, K9, 6, 2-year, 3-year, 6-year, and reestablish the regression formulas that are based on actual cost, because we all know that costs are increasing every year. They have increased since 2011. This is something that then we could re-perform every year and re-update those regression tables to reflect actual costs that are incurred.
If you did the 18 and then you did the 19, the 19 data would be after the legislative session and after we're setting budgets for next year. So just curious how you would anticipate funding for 2020, I guess, because you wouldn't have the 19 data.
Right, and I'm not saying changing it now.
I know, I'm just wondering how that would work.
So if we get so I have to look at time frame. So if we get the 19 data in December of 2019, right, Bon? Quote me when I get wrong. Then we could get those tables ready, or at least get something ready, maybe for the next session, the 2020 session, which would then be implemented maybe in 2021. Okay. So that's where I'm, time frame wise, I'm looking.
So in 2020, you just keep everything as is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that's all we can do. I don't think you can.
That was the question I had.
That's at least, that's our proposition.
It's on cost. So are you saying now that you have school level reporting, you can go through and look at every NESS school and how much it costs to run that school? Then you could plot that all out, redraw the regression formula based on that, and still have the formula distribute the total amount of
funding based on that. We're assuming that if we now have captured costs, that the regression tables are going to now accurately represent that, which should be a higher value because costs have gone up. There's no question that costs have not gone up. And then you would better be able to distribute probably most of the funding. if not all.
Yeah, I think we'd all just want to see like the current model versus, you know,
I was sure on it before I agreed to anything.
Hello.
You're going to find a lot of different levels amongst the different
Hello?
schools too, I think.
I think the important part is that you're recording them in the NESS, that expenditures in the NESS schools. If not, you're gonna see disparities in your funding. So that's the key part
In the program.
in the program.
Yeah, agreed.
I think it makes sense, your proposal. But do you see it on paper?
I'd like to run some when we get 18 data, just to kind of see what it does.
Yeah. I hope we can come up with something that's not going to hurt any of our existing or NESS schools, or I think that's going to create a lot of problems and a lot of. I don't want to have. I hope we don't have winners and losers. 'Cause yeah.
So Ben, we moved on.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
It's much more complicated. It's much more complicated than figuring actual costs. Your kids in a rural school don't have the same opportunities at the secondary level for sure that they do in a larger school on the Wasatch Front. And so you can't even calculate some of the costs. You can't calculate the lack of opportunity with class availability. You can't calculate the fact that in an elementary school you have combined grades and the teacher's trying to cover 2 different cores or 3 different cores with one teacher. I think it's a grand idea to try to calculate all the costs and make it all work out mathematically, but my suggestion is it's much too complicated for that. You can't just quantify some of these things.
Superintendent, I think their suggestion is just to reformulate the regression based on what we're currently recording as costs. So it's just a new plot. Personally, the methodology that's suggested is reasonable.
Right now, Superintendent, the costs that are shown in the regression table, I believe, are 2011 costs. And so we're suggesting that we update those to 2018 and then 2019 costs and rerun the regression tables and then redo the allocation. So then it's reflective of what truly it is costing to run that NESS school with current data rather than 2011 data.
All the money that's there would still be distributed. So at your current ADM level, you'd probably just get shifted up and receive more money than what you currently are.
Has any of that been done to this point, Jamie?
No, because I don't have 18 yet. So as soon as I get 18, that was our next step, is to run them and see.
I just wondered because that would be a sticky point with the group would be saying,
I don't know
how is it going to affect
the curve? The curve that's fine.
The winners and losers that was referred to by Chair Huntsman. I mean, how big those are. I'm sure Dale would have a hard time with the superintendents and we would with the VAs if we don't know what that is. That's the hard part. So when could we get at least a preliminary look at what the
impact? Keep the same beginning and ending point.
Yeah, you'd have to. And that's in statutes. You'd have to.
Bond.
If there's more plot, I mean, it could become.
When do we think we'll have data? Probably by January-ish. And then to run some tables probably shortly after that, maybe a couple months worth of time.
But we're trying to get this done before the legislative session, right?
This is
We gotta be done before the next
The one,
meeting, Hannah.
do we trust the 2018 school level reports?
Oh yeah.
Which is
How
why
good's your data you gave us?
Mine, I trust mine. In fact, I went through it dollar for dollar and that matched up right with yours. But that doesn't mean I can't vouch for the whole state.
I'm not sure that all.
One district, so.
I'm not sure that all
I think I was
districts are
within
really
pennies
allocating
bonds,
after NESS
so-
money. I mean, I don't know. Some might just be letting it flow.
Well, but all your It's not whether you coded it as NESS, it's whether you code it to the school.
The school.
The location.
Big spends, big spends.
Which should be
How
happening.
you,
Should be happening everywhere, shouldn't it?
Should be
how
doing
you
it.
allocated those to the school. If it's not, then you're gonna have those disparities. But if you allocated them to the.
But we'll have, it'll still
It'll
be an
show-
average, I mean, it'll be
So-
plotted.
So the 18 data though would be just giving us a preliminary view, and you'd actually be proposing that the 19
We do
data,
have
which
19. That gives you guys
would
another year
actually
to.
give us the
I mean, this is a short-term,
18
long-term
is
plan.
is an implementation period. It's to give you guys a look at it so that you can see where there are inconsistencies and where there are problems in the data being submitted, so that the 19 will be of greater consistency than the 18 was.
But if Jamie ran it on the 18, it'd give us an
It gives you an
indication, an indication of winners and losers and how the allocation, and then we could potentially sell it to the districts if it is in the realm of.
How do you adjust it year to year?
Like you'd have your costs updated every year, right?
So
And then I just rerun
regressions
it.
would,
So you just do the curve each year based on
could it be
the actual cost.
Hmm.
Can we, the question I have is,
Budget-wise,
could we
like-
skew it by saying, okay, I want some more money, so I'm going to put more money into this school? I mean, one thing I think is, as far as a good formula is that the entities can't skew it by their actions. And I'm afraid that if we have the ability to skew it by changing how much we're spending in certain schools, does that, is that
What
a problem?
prevented you from doing that in 2011?
Because we didn't have a.
Yeah, but that was self-reported numbers also.
I remember when Pat was working on gathering those. Say that, what you just.
I just wondered budget wise, planning, forecast, like that same 5-year look back, if we could adjust the regression formulas, take a look at that instead of
Doing it.
yearly, maybe look at it based on the 5-year that we would. that we've already
Transportation,
talked
we're doing
about.
like a 3-year rolling average.
Maybe that's a good way, but we don't have, so you'd start out with just 18, and you'd add 19, and you'd add 20, and then the 18 would roll off. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just, the overall distribution, let's not have swings in it year to
3 years
year.
of stable income before
Yeah.
it ups or downs, is what I think you're
If
saying.
you're using aggression, you can't change it a whole lot. You're just kind of adjusting where that curve is at to match, and it's gonna match your money, so it's not gonna change dramatically because your money's
There's
not
no,
changing.
NESS means staffing to me, so if it's fluctuating year to year, then my staffing's fluctuating year to year, and that's tough.
That's hard. Well, what about if you started out using the current formula as your base year? So that'll stabilize it somewhat. And then if you did 18, you're not gonna get as big a fluctuation if you went on a 3-year rolling average. And so that current formula.
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying.
Would start us and then
Smooth it out.
Smooth the
it,
distribution.
and then go, you add the 18 to it, and then the 19, and then you roll the original formula off, so that it gives some time for this.
It's probably not gonna change that much. Anyway, like you're saying, it's not gonna change that
No,
much
it
year to
probably
year.
won't.
anyway.
What if you had a 3-year rolling?
Other
Would that be
than
better?
Students might change.
Yeah, but that's the
That's
reality.
just,
anyway.
yeah, we're dealing with that anyway.
So what if we did like a 3-year rolling?
I
That
like
would
it.
just smooth it out a little bit, but you gotta be, what would you think about that, Jamie?
I don't have a problem, like we've done rolling averages on other formulas. I mean, what does
Kind of the same
LFA
thing
governor?
we do with the taxes.
I don't have an issue, like you said, special ed's on
5-year.
5-year rolling average 2 years ago,
Mhm.
so.
So I'm
They really want secure funding.
Well,
So,
it's because it's staffing.
Right.
It's hard to.
Yeah.
so if you do original
Hire
fiscal
and
year
fire.
18, fiscal year 19, that would be for fiscal year 21. And then 18, 19, 20 would be 22. So you would be 2 years back, 3-year average for the next year.
Instead of seven like we are now.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Instead of 7 like we are now.
7 years.
I like that.
I do
Me
too.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I throw you out?
But I'd like to see if we can model it, just give us a,
we'll just need to put original and 18 together and see.
Yeah, the original
President,
18 together and see what that is.
Our councilman suggested maybe we ought to find a better formula. This is the time I could throw you an idea.
Sure.
I think Ben maybe mentioned that too. We got the 4 secondary formulas. And, you know, they start at 300 for a 2-year, 450 for a 3-year, 500 for 4, 600 for 6. You think, you know, it looks like that's logical. But if you look at it, you take a 3-year, you do 2 of those, now that district can qualify 900 students instead of 600. So it's really not progressively, it's kind of jumbled when you really look into it there. But if we took your criteria and you said, okay, your schools got to meet the NESS criteria to be a NESS school, and then
Jeff's spreadsheet might be important.
can I read that? So you have your grades. Yeah, what I propose is throw out the 4 different levels of formulas for secondary, just make one. And then probably you'd have to divide it here at K through 6. So you'd have your K6 formula, the elementaries, so that's on 160. And then the upper grades have one formula for 7 through 12. So we probably set that to 600, something like that. And then your districts, whatever schools they want. You got an elementary school, they apply for that. That's great. You've got a middle school. Say it's
6, 7, 8.
6 through 8. Now you got your high school, 9 through 12. So they apply, they meet the criteria for small schools. And now for your formula, you say, okay, we're going to put together a cone or a pipe or whatever you call it. Students in these students feed those schools, so they're in this group, and they qualify under one formula. So now we just pull the 7th and 8th in, and the 9th through 12th in, and create one formula for that group of students that are under that cone. Usually a cone has several elementaries, middle school, feeder schools, yeah. So
You have your 6 with no longer experience.
6 people down here to elementary. So now, it doesn't matter if your district wants to put them all in one building, great, put them all in one building. Formula remains the same. If they want to adjust and they want to do 5 through 8 in that middle school, they can do it. Formula remains the same, funding remains the same.
What do you do with the 160 and the 600 though? How are those coming into play?
You apply it to those grades. It's not to the school level, it's to those.
So you're looking at a feeder pattern to a cone or whatever, as opposed to a, and so you qualify in elementary, that all the elementaries within that feeder pattern would be 160. Students in those grades qualify.
Yeah, you just look at that. Usually, you know, when these are small areas, there's usually just one elementary. I don't know if there's I kind of looked through, I didn't see anywhere with a big
But if you
issue.
had a middle school as well that was, say, 5, 6, 7, which happens time to time, would you be saying that your K through 7 student or through 6 students had to be under 160 in that feeder pattern? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm just trying to understand. And then your grades 7 through 12 in that feeder pattern would be up to under 600.
Some schools can divide it any way they want. For the formula, we just cut it off, put together the feeder pattern, apply your.
And then you'd have a different WPU amount for the 7 through students in 7 through 12 than you'd have for students in 1.
Yeah, formulas, you keep the 160 elementary type formula, and you just have one secondary formula. So now all across the state, it's just whatever group of students you have, whatever size they are, you're getting the same funding no matter.
So you're not necessarily funding by building, you're funding by students, and the district divides it up based on the building configuration.
Not necessarily district, they've got to be small schools, but it's got to be in that feeder pattern.
Right.
What if you have an elementary that qualified, but high school didn't?
You have that now, probably. Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, they got to qualify as small
You
schools.
have the opposite problem.
We have that now, there's some qualify on one end, not the other.
Yeah, I've got an elementary
But,
that
yeah, I wouldn't-
doesn't, but high school does.
Yeah, that's-
And the middle does.
I get that quite often.
Yeah, that could happen. And some will say, well, I thought, well, okay, we're still gonna have a 5, 6, 7, 8 here. And now we're pulling part of those into this formula, so now they're not gonna qualify anymore. Well, as I looked at it, the funding actually went up.
Really curious how it affects funding.
Because this group here was out here on this curve, right now, current curve. You're in a 450. Now you move to a 600 and you actually move back here, you got more money. Anyway, just be one formula.
So you'd have two curves basically, is what you're saying.
Two curves.
So right now I have a middle school that qualifies as a NESS and an elementary that doesn't. And if I move the 6th grade up to that middle school, it's just 7th and 8th. If I move the 6th grade up, that elementary still won't qualify, and then it'll kick the middle school out of the NESS qualifications.
So,
and how would it work under yours? I mean, under the current scenario, how would it work under yours?
You keep your schools. We just take.
So
we just create an imaginary school where they're all in one stream here. We just take your 7 through 12 students, and if they're under 600, we get some funding.
So you're pulling some WPU from this formula and some, or
this one
some value
stays
from this.
Well, this one stays the same. This one's elementary, stays the same, just the way it is.
We'll just go back to that middle school scenario, the 6, I'm still stuck on that.
Yeah,
well, you're gonna have to pull some value from.
So we bring
the
the
one
student
formula.
We bring these student numbers down here to see if this group qualifies. And we bring this group over here, 7th and 8th, put this together to see if they're under the 600 to qualify. So that now there's no more incentive to have two different smaller schools to have a middle school and a.
Would there be incentive to shift kids into a non-qualifying lower school to get your number of kids in a high school smaller so that they would fall back on the regression curve again?
This throws out school.
It's just going by grade.
School doesn't matter anymore. You can put it anywhere you want. It's just the stream that matters.
I'm talking grades. I'm just trying to see if, people may have incentive. Is there an incentive to shift a grade level either into or out of?
There is now. There absolutely is now. Because you can do this scenario and fall into the 3-year schools or 4-year schools instead of using the 6-year school formula. So there's an incentive in the formulas right now to not consolidate because you can split those and get 2 formulas instead of 1. And the 6-year formula is less than what the 2, 3, and 4-year formulas are.
So D, in this scenario, if Garfield has 2 elementary, well, let's leave elementary out. You have 2 middle schools and 2 high schools. Are you assuming that the elementary that feeds the high school is together?
Yep, we'd create one stream.
Not elementary, sorry, I meant middle. The middle and the middle school that feeds the high school is together in this 7 through 12 scenario?
Yep.
So what happens if you've got a middle school that's feeding 2 high schools?
Yeah.
Because that happens. I just know in Davis it happened. I don't know if it happens in any of the small schools. It doesn't in ours, yeah. But if it's.
Does anybody know any across in rural? I don't know any. We'd have to dig into some of that and see. I don't know any situations that way. I think we're small schools and so that would not happen, but.
So if I have 2 middle schools that feed 1 high school, all 3 of them you're suggesting is together in this 7 through 12 scenario?
Yeah, so, didn't see anywhere that happens, but.
I'm just throwing,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. As I looked at them, I only found one elementary, one middle school, one high school that, in any scenario I looked at, and but you know, I don't know every district intimately enough to speak to that. But.
Yeah, but the closer you get to the 600 and that, I mean, doesn't it reduce your, I mean, the closer you get to those max, and some of these situations, couldn't they cause you to get closer to those maxes?
Absolutely.
Those phase out.
And it also works the other way, because the school I looked at had the middle school. They moved from the max back to the middle and got more money because you're now only looking at this many students instead of, anyway, with under a 600 cap instead of a 450 cap. So they moved more to the middle of the formula. And that's as
Have you ran this scenario for the state?
it's a difficult thing to do to come up with, just like you said, you know, what criteria, what factors do you adjust, but I took a shot at it and tried, and it would take some time to, probably have to run a regression so that you match your money to your formula, and then, like you say, there'd be some winners and losers. It's like Huntsman said right now, there's winners and losers right now. With this, there'd be, once you move to this formula, now everybody's the same. There's no more winners and losers. Everybody's on the same formula. It's all just based on how many kids you got in that stream. If it's a small one, then you're this part. If you're a large one, then you're...
Okay, would this solve the issue that we've got a couple of districts that had concerns that they want to have a K-12 school as opposed to, because...
This solves the weighing issue.
Yeah. Okay, so how would it do it? Walk that through to, because you've got only one school, how would you work under the 160 versus the 600 cap?
K-12 scenario?
Yeah, it'd just be K-6 or 712.
So the K-6 students that were in that school couldn't exceed 160. The 712 kids in that school or feeder pattern, if you've got multiple schools, couldn't go over 600 and still stay in. Is that what you're suggesting?
So in elementary, it's still 1-to-1 because you don't have feeder.
Probably just
Elementaries,
be,
don't
yeah,
you? Do you?
Yeah, I don't think you just have one school you'd look at under that most likely. Yeah, this would solve the Wayne issue partially. Problem with Wayne, as I looked at it, I ran several scenarios trying to see what it would do to money in different districts, and I mean, depending on what you do, you can go all over the place, but the problem with Wayne is they have two schools and they're both right here at the top. So going from two formulas where you're at the top, they're gonna lose money no matter what we do.
If they combine.
If we change that away from the current formulas, I don't know anything we're gonna do that's gonna help people.
But by theory, we've talked about this before, they should be able to save some staffing costs.
And the other key to this, I
even though
think,
they lose some NESS.
The other key to make this work is, yeah, it is going to readjust. It's going to put everybody on the same playing field. There are going to be some losers. So if in that year when that happens, we could infuse $3 million to the whole formula overall, now those who would have lost, they're held harmless pretty much.
For how long?
Forever. You're done. This is one-time adjustment and everybody's on the same.
Oh, I see. So you're saying a $3 million ongoing?
Ongoing, one extra, yeah, ongoing, so that you bring the whole thing up, so that those lost now kind of get made whole.
So you hold harmless indefinitely, that's.
But you still need to base your regression formulas on something.
Yeah, that's.
So you still need costs.
Haven't solved your issue there, sorry. But yeah, you'd still have to run some costs and average it and do it statewide. Now the districts, and we've talked today about costs of buildings, and if you're gonna consolidate, they've gotta pass a bond. And yeah, those are 50-year, we're looking at a 50-year adjustment to consolidate. Now, if you do this, now you've taken out the incentive not to consolidate. Now the districts can start planning. They're gonna keep their money either way. So it's still that same, whether you have a middle school and a high school or just all in one building, you're gonna have the same funding.
So now the incentive is there to say, hey, yeah, let's go after trying to consolidate, save on that administration, buy teachers instead. And that's, it takes that disincentive that's out there right now to say, hey, we don't want to lose our NESS funding, so we can't consolidate this. But there would be some winners and losers. Yeah.
Simplifies it.
And so not to have losers, you'd have to infuse that new money to hold it more.
Bring everybody up a little, you know. You have to run some scenarios and see. It'll take some time. I didn't have enough time to run the full, create a formula and match the money and see who would win and lose. And then how you, whether you define your curve as very heavily weighted on the front or more weighted towards the middle, makes quite a difference on districts as well. That's where I like the idea of some kind of regression that takes the whole state and tries to match it closer to where that should lead, to the left or the right.
Definitely gonna lead and ride in the state.
Probably it's the one to the left.
For this formula.
It's a small school formula, and those, anyway, you're trying to help the smallest ones provide what everybody else is trying to provide. So probably needs to be more to the left.
All right, so where do we go with this from here then? Because if this is something that we can bring back, so Jacob, and from your vantage points, is this something that we could conceivably present to the governor's office and the governor? And I mean, because we did talk about the $3 million and ongoing. It's something we probably have to further develop, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'd want to see more details, right? And that 3 wasn't specifically for
I
NESS.
know, yeah,
Yeah.
right. No, I get that. So
It sounds like that'll be separate. Maybe at some point when you roll this in, you say, okay, let's roll that in to make this whole thing work.
I don't know that you'd get a forever hold harmless through.
Well, it wouldn't be a hold harmless. It would just be raising everybody up so that the negatives disappear. It's not really a hold harmless. It's just raise the formula so that those who lost money on the old one are now even on the new one. Not because you've artificially done a hold harmless, just because the formula works.
in the future, this seems to me like it would be auditable, right? And you would have a standard that everybody was familiar with that was easier to interpret.
I like the simplification of it. I think that yeah, so from that aspect, I don't have an issue with it, and I don't know that legislators would, but if we're going to accept that funding can shift, would I still select a regression table to do that? I don't think so. So if I make that decision that moving from where we are is okay at some point, then I would probably prefer a more wholesale change, but
So a different kind of a formula?
turn it to a student-based formula. But that's just my opinion. But this is better than where we are, and it's probably a good position to go between the two perspectives. But NESS right now isn't a true add-on in a student-based formula, and, funding formula. So that's where we jump a little from that. Other states basically do it as a student add-on. Yeah, but it's
it's a little harder though, because the smaller the school, the more additional support you need. So you can't be a strictly student by student unless you have some kind of fluctuating base based on size. So I think straight student is kind of hard to do for this, because the smaller the school, the more money they need for admin and stuff like that.
There's be a weighting on the student bill, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, this is probably a longer term process to go to something like that.
That's okay, it's good stuff.
Because I don't know that until you get, well, maybe at least 2018 data to run regressions on this, that we'd be able to do anything or have a more developed conversation as to whether this is a way to move.
So I guess where I'm at with this, Ben, is can we say that to the legislature that we have these scenarios? Because again, I want to make sure that we're doing our level best, and we are doing our level best to make sure that when we sit in front of them, that there's this term out there about progress, right? Are we making progress? Are we addressing the questions and concerns, whoever they may be, whatever they may be, by whoever they may be? That this group is trying to find that.
At least from my perspective, I don't know about the governor's office, but if you come in to the committee and say, okay, this group of the board and the Board of Education has reviewed that, and we've settled these issues on criteria, qualifications. We know that the regression formulas need to be rerun, but we probably don't have the data to do this for FY20, and we'd like to at least have 2 years of school level data before we implement something. But this is a direction we're going. I mean, because you could probably run this scenario from using 18 data, look at winners and losers, and even if we discuss that component again in interim, I don't know that that's, because the qualification's not really going to change distribution of money, or it shouldn't a lot. And this could, and I could see legislators wanting to know whether their districts are winners and losers. You want to know that. Board members are going to want to know that. But that decision likely will still be with the board on developing those regression formulas. So, bringing to the committee the changes we need now in policy or statute, or rule or statute, and then say these are where we're going as far as the regression formulas, but we have to have time for the course to come in and calculate them, and then we review that again, and then it gets implemented. I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
Because you are showing progression to a solution.
Yeah, but we can't do so. We gotta have data.
Yeah, I mean, there's right now, even with the current regression formulas, you're not going to be able to rerun those in time for session.
Right.
Right? I mean, because if all the data doesn't come in, or we don't have it at a good enough point until what did you say, January or something like that? Because I imagine that some in this group, BAs, may want to run it on their own. Just as a comparison. I have confidence that Jamie can do math, but yeah. So
okay. Jacob, anything else?
No.
Okay. So I know what the weather's like out there, and we probably got to make some other decisions. So how do you feel about where we're at right there? Or how far have we made? Go ahead. Ask your questions.
No, I'm just gonna. So what I'm getting from the committee, you can tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like we're okay if we not change the formula for fiscal year 20. That we need to figure out, get data first in order to see fixing the regression formulas, and then at that point in time we can run this scenario and figure out where the differences are from current practice to this new practice, and how it's changed from 11 to 18 to 19. you know, very.
So we'd be looking at it as though with looking to new regression, doing a new regression based on 18 data, using the same criteria as the current formula, and then we would potentially look at this scenario as well, do a comparison and decide what makes more sense. And compare that versus where we're at now, so you could then see winners and losers.
And then I'm assuming that we're going to have a third scenario, which would be an original 1819 and do a rolling regression tables.
Yeah.
This might also need a legislative action where right now it specifies 4 right in the statute.
That would allow them to come in the 2020 session, make that change for distribution in 2021.
Right. It'll be a while on that process, no matter what.
Yeah, so if you move that, I agree, you're gonna have to get statutory change to do it.
We're going to need statutory change
We gotta
anyways
run
to
it
fix the
first,
ADM.
though, to give you guys a chance to see it and do all that.
2 years minimum, just working through that whole process. It goes that far,
So let's sum up this meeting though. So how much do you have left to cover?
I have 2 more points.
Okay.
But
What are the points real quick? No, go ahead.
so my next one was talking about carry forward funds and the allocation or the distribution method of doing those based on tax effort. I'm unsure if everyone's comfortable with using tax effort to distribute NESS funding, and if those two correlate to each other, or if there's something better to do to distribute carryover funds.
Well, we would hope there would be none that we'd get.
Well, I know.
It's about straight percentage.
Well, and generally, I don't know that. I know that this was put in a time when, and I believe it was Senator Stevenson at the time, and he's been on this kick of, the ability to pay is what he always talks about, is the ability to pay. Well, the basic school program already has that inherent in it, with the basic levy contributing to all your WPUs. And so in theory, that's already considered in the distribution form. True, your rates may cause some change under using an ability to pay when you take all taxing effort into account. But should you take all taxing effort into account for a basic school program distribution? So to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have this component in the formula. It does seem kind of inconsistent with the entire basic program. So I would hope at some point this would come out as well.
Right now
What do you
it's
do
only
with
a
the
rule.
what do you do with the balance?
Well, so I had a thought. Do you want me to voice my thought? Sure. So the only consistent data point throughout all of the 5 regression tables, is the WPU value, the actual 3395 WPU value, because the value of WPUs or the percent to increase that WPU changes on each regression table currently. So there's not a set one linking data point between all 5 tables. So it's really easy to run a goal seek and just increase the value up to distribute the rest of the funds using the existing regression tables, which means existing WPU values, existing curve, everything is as is, status quo, and just increase the WPU value in order to allocate out those dollars. And that's something that technically could be done at the mid-year update in the current year. So you would be getting all funding in the current year rather than waiting a year lapse.
So it would distribute it all under the same formula, the initial formula. So
It would just be increasing the WPU value.
With the
It would
tax
show.
effort formula.
Correct. I don't know what the thoughts are with an increased WPU value within a program that's technically the basic school program, and I know we may have some concerns about that when one program has a higher value than the other ones.
You're just talking about a method to distribute all the funding.
Right,
really,
because
is
we
what
would
you're-
still
it's
run
what you're
everything
doing.
as is for
And
at mid-year, and then at mid-year I know exactly what that balance is, because that's
Right.
not going to change. The only effect is that we would have to do out-of-state tuition, because that would come out of that, and then I'd have an entire balance that I could pay out at least after I run those payments and know, okay, here is the NESS carryover balance. Is there a way that we could distribute it in the current year? I don't know what everyone's thoughts or feelings are on that.
Well, I'm sure in favor of getting rid of the tax. I haven't ever said much about that, but it doesn't really work. Tax effort doesn't really work good for my school district. But I mean, if something like this would work.
I think it's good thinking. Lark and I are sitting here talking about it, and we think we're on. I mean, we would be supportive. We're on the right, with it.
Jacob, what do you think?
Well, I agree with the logic that the local contribution, the taxing effort, was already inherent in the basic, so I'm okay with that. I'm curious about the WPU value.
You're proposing that as a kind of a 1 year
Yeah,
type thing until such time as you can get the regressions and
Correct. This would
and
just
use
be
that.
until we get the formula corrected.
And then
or
every
at
year
least
after
updated.
that, you go back to what the WPU value is.
Well, I'm hoping that once we have a true representation of costs, that the formula should be distributing the majority of the funding where you're not having these huge carryover balances every year.
So then after that, you just rerun your cost analysis, bump the formula to match it, and go back to what the WPU value is.
Yeah, and I guess another way of maybe describing them and coming around to less ups than the way we talked before is that whether you say WPU value or just on a WP basis,
Correct.
you can either, it's kind of the same thing. So it's just,
It is the common denominator between all regression formulas.
yes.
I'm just a little uncomfortable with having that out there. Now they're getting more than
Yeah, we're going
everybody
to
else.
increase the
on
WPU. So that's what I would say is if you
Not
just say
increasing the WPUs,
value,
we're
yeah.
distributing based on
On
the
the-
WPUs.
on the allocation of
Okay,
WPUs.
so just that's proportionally again.
Yeah, it's proportionate.
It's just a proportion.
I'm not manipulating or altering or changing the existing regression formulas. I'm using everything the same. We're just bumping it based on the WPU value.
I would say keep the WP value in there with an add-on. So no, we just have our WP value in there, but it's got this little add-on.
I mean, and the NESS formula would all run exactly the same, and then we're looking at probably May would probably be about the time after I've done out-of-state tuition payments. Then I could say, okay, here's the true carry-forward balance in NESS for that year, and then rerun the formula and distribute that balance.
But it will have an impact on districts that are receiving money under the tax impact formula, probably most.
But we're talking,
It's not significant.
it's not, yeah, we're not
It's
talking
not
a significant
significant.
amount of money right now. And I'm worried that if the appropriation continues to grow, the carry forward will grow.
Yeah.
And is tax effort the best way to distribute it?
Yeah, you're looking at what, 10, 20, 30,000 for a district.
Yeah, it's not very
That's
much.
not a lot for that
I
little.
just knew that North Sanpete had a very large, they have the largest tax effort, or probably within the NESS, close to it, so that, I just know there was a concern there. So.
Can I address that?
Go ahead, sir.
So
Go ahead.
South Sanpete has the highest effort and the low tax rate. We're not far behind them. I had this conversation with my BA this week, and my thoughts are what's been discussed before, and that is with the equalization funds that are coming out of the basic levy, I think we've addressed the equalization issue. And I think what we need to say to the districts, and I'm the head of URSA, so I got to talk to all the rural districts, but I think the word that we use is that the taxing effort and the equalization has been addressed since this last NESS distribution of the remaining funds was developed, and therefore we don't need to address it in the NESS formula. We just need to move forward in that the equalization is addressing ability to pay, and NESS is addressing the extra cost of running a small school. I think it'd be really helpful to hear from Dale, his thoughts on this since he's on the URSA board.
I concur with where you're going. I think it seems to me to be the, not the easiest, but the most equitable way of doing it.
So my last one's really easy. So in statute, it allows our board to allocate additional WPUs for 2 years to schools that do not appear to qualify for NESS based on consolidation. So they've consolidated, and now they've grown to a level where they're not eligible anymore. Our question was just, for our board, we probably need to establish some sort of monitoring or a funding step down plan, or get this section of code repealed.
We can do that. That's part of the finance committee. Does that make sense? So that I can have the repeal process work through.
I don't think we've ever enacted this piece of code. I think that if schools consolidated, that they were still within the ADM, the only one that has been a question was one.
Any questions about this? Seems pretty easy, right? I mean, is it any? Okay.
And then we've already talked about adding a new program in the APR for that. I had some other just questions that have been brought to our attention. Should NESS schools qualify for class size reduction funding? Because technically NESS schools should already have small schools or small class sizes in nature. And then we have a couple issues with students who are crossing a state line to go to a school in another state, and should that state or should that school still qualify for NESS funding if they're not really instructing any students in that school in Utah?
Yes, definitely. No, let's move on.
Ben, you're okay with that, right?
Yeah, you're okay, Ben. What's going on down there in Cape?
So that's what I have.
On that one, I would just say if they would have qualified for NESS under the being educated within the district as opposed to another state, we should.
Okay, it's time.
It'll be forever, man.
Okay, so it's time for an check. Okay. Are we going in the right direction? Ben, do you feel like we made progress here today? Jacob? We made progress here today. So here's the next step. I got to get this in front of the finance committee, which is on Thursday, the January. No, actually, it might be on Wednesday. No, what's that Wednesday? Is that the 9th? The 10th is Wednesday? So
I think we're heading in the right direction, Scott, Ben, and others. I think it's been a good discussion, and I think we made some progress. So thank you for those allowing us, those of us to phone in. So.
Yes, sir. So what my proposal is that, and it's easier. It's always easier for the one that doesn't have to do it.
I like how you look at me.
Well, I'm the one that doesn't have to do it. So. Jamie, can you consolidate this, and then we present all that we did here today in front of the finance committee meeting? Then I would like to have another meeting with you all before the legislative session starts. And I would invite you to come to the finance committee. Well, you don't all have to come, but you can if you want. But I invite you to come to the finance committee meeting, because I'm sure that they're going to, as we roll this in as a potential, but we're going to say, what it basically amounts to is we want to rehearse what we're going to present. We present it to the board first, then we present it to the legislature, right? So that if the board has issues or concerns, there's a little bit of time there between, because Ben, when would you anticipate that this would be on the agenda in the session? Second week? Or? I mean, I know you don't have much control now, but I know you can kind of give us a little bit of.
I think, and I mentioned this because we start so late, and I don't know when the board meeting is in February, but if the board needs to come back in their February meeting and make a change, I think we have time in the committee to accommodate it, because most of our
That will
committees,
help.
most of our committee meeting is going to be the first 3 weeks of February, probably.
Right, okay.
We'll start in January, but that's January 28th.
Yeah,
so
because
probably-
they're meeting in the first week of February, our board is,
Yeah.
so.
So if anything goes fine, then we'll just schedule it, but if we need to hold it, we can hold it later into the session.
Does any of this need to go to the legislature, or is this just?
Well, so what the state school board has asked for is along the lines of what I just presented, is that we take what we did here today in this meeting, we consolidate it, and we show that we're on a direction, that we have an azimuth, right? And that we did make some decisions in here, or some recommendations, okay? And then we do that as part of the finance committee meeting. Because it's a little bit awkward, not awkward, but different now than probably you were used to, Bruce. It's now they meet, the committees meet, but then they don't, the committee stuff doesn't get heard till a month later, right? So it's a little, that's where I think Ben's coming from, where if we do in front of the full board, then, because what we're under too is the board here wants to, as much as possible, have present to them first what we present, and especially something as high visibility as this is, right? So it's just the timing, and we are where we are. So did I answer your question, or I mean, that's the way ahead here. That's the direction. Is we want to make sure that our board members are. But this is a lot of stuff on them. This is a lot of information for them to, gather too. So a lot of them are going to be calling you. They're going to be, what does this mean? What did you guys do here? And so that's why it's really important that, as we walk out of here, we all agree to the plan and all this. So my other point to this is when she consolidates this, we would send it out to you as well, so you would see it hopefully before the finance committee meets. But these guys need some time off. You all know how hard Natalie, Jamie, Vaughn, Brett, John, they all work here, and they need some time off. So I'm trying to balance that too. I'm really trying to, that's why I say it's always easier for the ones that don't have to do it, right? So if you can do that, and I'm sure all you would help her, right? I'll help her as much as I can. It's probably just staying out of the way. But that's where we're headed, okay? Does that work for you on the phone? Or okay, sir, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'm a member of the prevalent religion in this state, so we always have meetings to plan meetings. I don't want to plan another meeting.
Okay.
But I think it would be well, once we get that consolidated, because the last thing I would want to do is go before the finance committee and have one of us say, oh no, that's not what we said.
Yeah, right, yeah, so
I think it would be well to have.
Well, okay, that's a good question.
So you get that stuff and we can have some
Right.
input, but before you go to the finance committee, that we're all, because I don't want to get before the finance committee and then have one of us say, well, no, that's not the way I
When
would
did
do
you
it.
say the finance committee meeting?
That one.
The ninth.
The ninth.
9th of January?
January,
Which
yeah.
is a Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay, that's pretty close to
USBA, so if we could come in on the 8th or.
So we may come in early, a day early, and
I'm assuming that I'll get this sent out in a perfect world. I would like this sent out probably like at least a week, hoping at least a week before that finance committee, so it gives you time to review it and provide any feedback.
Maybe we don't need a meeting, maybe we can just give you input over the phone, but when you do that, then I don't hear everybody else's input,
Yeah.
So I don't know, it just, because it's such a big deal,
Yeah.
I think
that's
when the
fair.
committee goes before the finance committee, we need to be pretty solid.
Wednesday the 9th.
Thursday, I know we've got US
And
on
our,
10th.
on the 10th, there's a health pool meeting.
I mean, I appreciate that. I agree with the superintendent. Whoever comes to the finance committee, and it can be all of you if you want, I'd recommend that at least one superintendent and one BA come, whoever you guys want, more if you want. Jacob, if you'll be there for this agenda item, you too, Ben. Because it's just that big. It is that big. Here's the other piece to this too. There's 5 finance committee members. There's going to be at least 4 new ones. Now they could be existing board members, but there was a cycle here, and now they're so they did leadership elections, and obviously Mark's still the chair, Brittany's the vice chair, they went to one vice chair. But they're reconfiguring the whole finance committee, so I have no idea who's gonna be on that committee yet. You know, which I'm not saying that's a problem, it's just gonna be, I don't know what kind of questions they're gonna have, I don't know all that. I'm anticipating that Mark will still stay on the finance committee, so that'll help, you know, because at least he has the background from me today, okay?
And again, you mentioned that some of the board members may be calling whomever is in their area. And again, when they make those calls, we need to be pretty consistent that this is where we're at.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And I think the only way to do that is to be together as a group and make sure that we are.
Yeah.
So a meeting to have another meeting, but
yeah. Well, so do you want? Would you all like me to try to set a meeting for, say, maybe January? I'm sorry, 3rd or 2nd or?
Well, we've got meetings up here starting on the 10th for the convention.
That's after the 9th.
It's too late, bro.
So I'm wondering,
Can we put it all out and just?
Yeah, I mean, we can do it that way, sure.
Just do an
Yeah, I
email
think
and
that's
say,
what
okay, is
Jamie
there
was
any
saying.
issues or is everybody in agreement?
Yeah.
If there are issues, then we call a meeting.
that's
Okay.
that's fine as long
How's
as
that idea?
we don't sabotage the process.
right,
I hate it when we sabotage our own process,
Make sure everybody weighs in, that you know they're okay or
and we
not.
do it a lot. Yeah.
All right.
Jamie, would you be willing to,
territorial.
30 seconds, just real quickly reiterate each?
There are meetings scheduled for the BAs and superintendents up in Salt Lake on the 10th and 11th. Our meeting starts at 11 o'clock on the 10th. We can meet before that. We can meet that night, or we can meet on the
Their meeting on the 9th.
Or
has to be before
But
that.
Sam, they're meeting on the 9th, so any input has to be given
Prior to that.
at least a couple of days before the 9th if we're gonna have.
oh, I'm sorry, I heard the 11th. My bad.
Maybe not a couple of days, but at least sometime. And you know, Dee, maybe you're right, maybe we can just do it over email. But please, let's not
Try
sabotage.
and do it over email, and then if we need to have a meeting, then call.
Maybe on the 8th or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, if anybody has concerns, let's call a
I
meeting.
like your concept. Let's take it a meeting, let's do one.
We need it, because
But it would have to be like the 2nd, 3rd, something like that of January if we need a meeting, right?
Well, I think what Jamie's saying is, so the finance committee is on the 9th, so she, you know, if everything falls into place and I don't give her any other distractions or anything like that, she'd probably send it out to you maybe on the 2nd or 3rd. 3rd probably.
Or I don't give it.
Say again?
Jacob doesn't give it.
Yeah, Jacob.
I won't say a thing, I'm done with it.
Okay,
this year.
3rd, you know, so then you get it, we all would get it on the 2nd and 3rd, so then, you know, we just ask you to review it. So maybe by that Friday, the 4th, is it? What is it? Yeah, 4th. You know, that we all could collectively make the call, you know, and say, okay, let's get together on Monday, we need to hash some of this out. What I would also encourage is that when we send it out to you, there's nothing wrong with, you know, asking, if it's just a clarifying question or something like that, just email the group and say, hey, what does that word mean, or what, you know.
We could do it strictly a video conference, not worry about it.
Yeah, I could try to set that up.
Because we're already gonna be coming up that week anyway. But I don't know why.
We could work it out. Okay, all right, that's the plan. Any questions on the plan and azimuth or direction we're going? Okay, thank you all for your patience. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, you wanted to go ahead. Go ahead, Julie.
I'm fine. So, things I wrote down. Eligibility criteria is still ADM and either a transportation criteria, which would be school to the next available school within the district that has student capacity. Oh, yeah, I know, sorry, I have to read. Or we would do the consolidation, which is maximum student capacity of a like school, and that is verified through the open enrollment similar criteria. And once you apply, we were looking at a 3 to 5 year renewal process with the year in between of those a certification.
You talked about 35 minutes instead of 45,
Yeah.
is that right?
Yeah, that's on this other paper.
No change for the high school?
Correct.
We've done
You
high
think
school with one of them?
Probably should.
By the same proportion?
An hour and 5 minutes, if we're dropping it by the same proportion, 10 minutes? Or what?
Well, 10
Yeah,
out
it's the
of,
same.
what's 10 out of
Oh, are you
45
doing-
versus, it'd be like 15 or
That brings
so minutes.
more people in.
You still have to meet the ADM though, right?
Like 90 minutes?
Well, right now, the high school's 75 minutes, right?
Uh-huh.
It's like, it'd be like 90 minutes.
So you take 16 and 2/3 off.
No,
So go to 60.
it's around.
Go to 60.
Was it high school's, how much?
An hour and 15.
Yeah, so
So you go to 60 minutes.
Why did I?
So are we in agreement with the 35 and 60?
So here's the thing, if this helps, it's okay to just try it, right? Can we just propose it and then, because, you know, the board's gonna see it, the legislature would likely see it. I don't think there's any harm in just proposing it, right? I mean, unless it's really just, you're just, and this goes for those still on the phone, if you think it's a showstopper, then, to me, it seems like it's a pretty good way to get some criteria or standards set that, you know, we can go forward with, subject to further review and
Yeah, no,
approval.
it'll
Yeah.
get fully vetted. I
Yeah.
mean, it'll get heard. I think
Right.
the point is, the committee's saying this
Yeah.
may not be the right number.
Yeah,
The
that's
45
true.
and the 115, right? Ultimately, that's what the committee's suggesting,
Okay,
right?
yeah. So, we clear?
Go
Sure.
forth and
Clears money.
suggest.
Yeah, we're gonna go forth and suggest. Okay?
So did you land at 60 on the high school?
That's what I have written down.
See if anyone cares.
See if that adjusts anything, we'll reevaluate. So for the formula, it's status quo as is, with the caveat that we are looking to get data from school level reporting for fiscal year 18 and then for fiscal year 19. We will do possibly 3 scenarios, whether we take and just rerun the regression formulas for 18 with 18 data and 19 with the 19 data and see where we land, where we do a 3-year rolling average, original 18-19 for fiscal year 21. The original falls off and we pick up fiscal year 20 for fiscal year 22, or D's new scenario, which we'll have to run and figure out how that affects the changes with everything. We talked about not distributing carryover for fiscal year, starting in fiscal year 19 and 20, based on tax effort, but maybe based on WPUs, until we can update the formula. At that time, we'll have to reevaluate a carry forward formula. And then adding a new category on the APR for a program code for NESS, where expenditures will be reported there. And then it sounds like we're maintaining students across the state line, and we didn't make a decision on class size reduction, but that's what I have on the sheet. Yeah, I know.
Not even worth it.
I know, that's why I didn't. So that's my recap.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is what I need to
So
do.
we'll put it together, publish it about a week before the finance committee meeting, take a look at it, and then we'll decide what we need to do there. Okay, thanks so much, safe travels. Me, please, thank you.
Thank you very much.